Good morning, everyone. I'd like to call the meeting to order and acknowledge that we are in Treaty 1 territory, the home and traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, Ojibwe, Inuit Cree, and Dakota peoples, and in the national homeland of the Red River Métis. Our drinking water comes from Shoal Lake 41st Nation in Treaty 3 territory. My name is Cynthia Stevens, and I'll be chairing our hearing this morning. Joining me this morning from the Board of Revision are Ms. Linda Schultz and Mr. Kevin Stephenson. From the Assessment Department, we have Mr. Matthew Baracus, and our administrative personnel are Tristan Bradine and Fran Picotto. To the Zoom participants of the hearing, please note you are placed in the waiting room until your property is called upon. When it is your turn, you will be admitted into the meeting. Kindly follow along on the City of Winnipeg's Board of Revision YouTube channel for the hearing process. Once the host admits you into the hearing, please close or mute your YouTube player. You will then be permitted to speak with respect to your property. Once your hearing has concluded, you can leave the meeting. We will be hearing applications for a revision of the assessment roll in accordance with the Municipal Assessment Act. The matters for which revision is requested have been described in each application. We will limit discussion to those matters. The statements that are made at this hearing are sworn testimony, and anyone speaking to the matters must be sworn in. Please be advised that the comparisons of assessments of properties are not considered evidence of market value by the Board of Revision. The Board of Revision is appointed annually by Council and is independent of it and the City Administration. It makes its decisions on the basis of the evidence provided at this hearing and issues a written order that will be mailed to all parties as soon as possible. Please note that the Board's decisions with respect to an application may be appealed to the Manitoba Municipal Board if the matter pertains to assessed value or classification, or to the Court of King's Bench if the matter pertains to the application of exemption from taxation. Should you wish to appeal, information on how to do so will be included with the board's order. With respect to the hearing process, I will confirm the points of appeal with your property to be addressed with each applicant. Following the swearing in, we will then have the assessor's testimony followed by questions that the applicant may have, and then the applicant's testimony followed by questions. Each side will have an opportunity to summarize if they wish. Once all of the evidence about an application has been brought forward, the applicant may leave. The process will repeat for each item on the docket today. The session will close after all applications have been heard, and the board will deliberate in private and make its decisions. You will receive the board's decision by registered mail as soon as possible. As information, all public hearings are live streamed, recorded, and will be part of the public record. We will be hearing items 1 to 8 on our docket today. Ms. Picotto, please affirm the assessor's and the applicant's testimony. Thank you.
Mr. Assessor, please state your full name.
Matthew Baracus.
Do you affirm that the evidence you're about to give at this hearing is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Thank you. Mr. Applicant, please state your full name.
Jared Story.
Do you affirm that the evidence you're about to give at this hearing is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, I do.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning, Mr. Story. Thanks for joining us this morning. Okay, so the first item on the docket today is 565, sorry. No, 615. I skipped down to the next one. 615 St. Anne's Road. I believe I'll just confirm with both the assessor and the applicant today that we're dealing with assessed value on all these properties this morning.
That's correct, Madam Chair.
Okay. Yeah, I know there is one preliminary issue on one property, but we'll deal with that when we get there. Okay. So Mr. Baracus, if you could read this property onto the roll and start with your presentation. Thank you.
All right, thank you. File number 23-3008. Roll number 08005425000615 St. Anne's Road. Roll years 2025, April 1st, 23, reference date. Assessed value 11,619,000. 8 buildings. It's 2 stories. So these are Manitoba housing. It's like a townhouse complex. It's on St. Anne's between Woody Dale and Granby Bay. 1976. We don't have an effective age on it. It's got 100 suites and 100 outdoor parking spots.
You know, Matthew, you froze there for a second.
Oh.
So would you just after you read the value? So if you wouldn't mind starting again, sorry.
Okay, so it's on St. Anne's between Woody Dale and Granby Bay. It's a Manitoba housing townhouse, so it's not for profit. 1976, no effective age, 100 suites, 100 outdoor parking spots. On to the next page. There's no recent sales history on the subject property. On page 3, you can see the modeled workup, 100 units total. 32 are 2-bedroom, 68 are 3-bedroom. We got the average monthly rent as per the model, 1,233. So that gives you your gross potential rent and your modeled vacancy rate. With the modeled expense ratio, you get a net operating income of 650, 641. And we've got a 5.6 cap rate on it. And that's an estimated market value per suite of 116, 190. Just to kind of streamline things, unless anything's changed, glancing at the applicant's brief, the issue is predominantly the cap rate, as I think we're the same in terms of NOI. So on page 4, you have the rent comparables, and they're all commercial row houses. One thing I should note, and I'll note it now because I use these comparables for multiple properties on this docket. 515 Meadowood, I asked the board not to consider that one. 515 Meadowood is actually like an affordable housing co-op. So it's not a property that I would like. It's not a good representation of what a for-profit operation would perhaps set their rents at. So just discount 515 Meadowood Drive. Not as applicable for this as we agree on income, but for future properties in this docket, I figured I'd just get that out of the way.
Okay, thank you.
So you can see their effective year built ranges and their unit distribution. Mostly 2- and 3-bedroom units. Comparable number 2 does have a large number of 1-bedroom units. And the model rent falls within the range. So on page 5, you see the CMHC townhouse market rent report for St. Vital. We're at about 89.56 of the CMHC zone for townhouse. That's what it comes out to. I'll just leave the income there. Page 6. So this is our supplementary cap rate evidence chart. Sample of actual sales that took place during the reference period. The purpose of showing these individual cap rates is to illustrate the accuracy of the model and substantiate the model derived cap rates. They are not meant to be comparable specific to the property. Unfortunately, we don't have a row house sale that was available during this time period. So none of these are row houses, and today that's the type of property that we're looking at. So it ranges from 3.46 to 574. On to page 7. This is our automatically generated capitalization rate chart showing the 20th and 80th percentile of properties for all types for the city of Winnipeg. For multifamily, that is 4 3/4 to about 5.5. Page 8, Municipal Act excerpts. You've seen that page before. It's just a automatically generated page. Page 9 shows the property. I believe that's the Seine River to the east of it there. It's off St. Anne's. And there's some pictures. I didn't inspect the property, but I did use Google Street View. But it looks like the outsides have been redone. And we have some documentation to support that coming up. Like it looks like the roofs, the windows, the sidings. It doesn't look like 1976. Parking lot looks like it's in good shape. Looks like the sidewalks have been redone. It's in a good area. Looks like a good spot. On to page 11. So these are permits that are actually open in our system. Like we don't have an effective age on it. So from page 11 onwards to page 18, there's several quite high value permits. The total of all these permits is actually 8,445,000 when you look at the declared construction value. And it's interior work, including reinforcement of structural members in the crawl space, floor wall upgrades, new fixtures, finishing millwork, exterior work, to include exterior envelopes, window and door replacement, mechanical and electrical to be done as well. And so when you go up to the exterior pictures, that tracks, like that looks all recently done pretty extensively. And so it says these were issued in 2018, so they would have been done in the not too distant past. The Amanda address, like there's multiple sub addresses for this building. So this first one on page 11 is 623 St. Anne's, and the next page they did again extensive work to this building, 615 St. Anne's, sub addresses, which is the same as the address on the docket. And it's the same level of work. So quite extensive. I would say that it warrants an effective age. Definitely these are the level of upgrade unquestionably that would extend the life of the property. We don't have an effective age on this property. So an interior inspection should be done so these permits can be closed and the changes can be reflected, but they aren't. On page, yeah, so they did some towards the end of the permits here. They did some interior exterior alterations and change of use to establish a community resource center in one unit. Again, reinforcement, floor wall upgrades. They did a bunch of work. So I definitely think we need to go down there and check it out. They built an office addition on page 18, 264 for sales, 40,000. You guys can read the permits. I'm not gonna bore everybody by reading them out. So just to wrap it all up, you know, on page 3 we have our evaluation. Market value per suite 116,000 for 2 and 3 bedroom units. I mean, based on the level of renovation and 5.6 cap, I think that cap's probably high based on these open permits, but I haven't gone in there and taken a look. So no changes. That's my evidence.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Story, any questions?
Yes, I do. Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Brokus, this assessment is all modeled, is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. So in terms of, since we're dealing with a social housing, I guess we could call it a family housing project, is the model, how does the model treat social housing if it is indeed a subset of, we'll call it market housing for lack of a better term?
Well, when assigning and assessed like a market value to it, there isn't a subset for like social housing because we're assessing the properties on the basis in which a for-profit purchaser would purchase it in order to run it in a manner that's gets them the highest return possible.
Okay, so no adjustments, just so we're clear, and this is for all of the properties today except for Desmiron. There's been no adjustment in the model or no, the model doesn't have the ability to capture the fact that these are rent geared to income social housing complexes, correct?
Yeah, because that's we're looking at the highest and best use valuation,
Yeah.
and that wouldn't be what it is.
Okay, and since it is all modeled, that the number of buildings, 8 buildings, does the model consider multiple buildings? And I ask because we've seen in the past where there are a number of buildings on the premise that that would indeed lead to a higher cap rate in the model. Is that your understanding as well?
It might. I'm not I can't say for certain, but I would lean towards it might.
Um, and similarly, row houses in your model, are row houses applied a cap rate that is higher, lower, or equivalent to what we'll call a more typical vertical apartment, for lack of a better term?
I don't believe there is a distinction, but I cannot say for certain.
Okay, I noticed that it's showing 100 suites, but I think what's happened here, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that the last permit that you have here for that 264 square foot, call it a leasing office effectively, is the city counting that as is that being counted as, say, a 2-bedroom suite? Or I asked because I have 99.
Oh, okay. I'm not sure.
Okay.
This permit's open. It looks like it's in addition to an existing apartment building. Something that would have been additional instead of like a repurposing of a space. So I'd have to double check that when we go down there and take a look.
Okay, that's fine. In terms of the, okay, I'll leave that. It is all modeled, you said. Now, in terms of the rent, and this is, I'm sure this is just a cap rate argument, but I asked for a specific reason. On the rents, you've looked at CMHC and that's fine, but isn't that 90% of CMHC rents, isn't that reasonably high compared to the way the model typically treats other social housing complexes?
Well, I mean, we don't make a distinction in our model, but what we do is like with the understanding that just based on putting it this way, like the way they've chosen to run it, sometimes these properties might end up getting worn down or in a state of disrepair. We go inspect them, and then if that's physical needs to be reflected, we reflect the physical by changing the income quality in our model, which will generate a rent that will typically come in below what otherwise not beat comparables might look at. But it's based on the physical, not based on the non-highest and best use manner in which the current owner is running it at.
Okay. Okay, so I guess what I'm hearing is for some social housing properties, and I think we'll see them today, we're sort of used to seeing a 65 to 75% of CMHC. So what I'm understanding from you is then the income quality of the model has not been adjusted for this property, correct?
No. Well, I mean, let me double check. I mean, based on the permits, I would definitely lean towards not doing it, but I'd have to inspect first. You know, there's some Manitoba housing, they've got properties all over the city. We find sometimes more in the core area. They get worn down quicker, or perhaps, you know, when we go to buildings where it's like, it's all bachelors, and you know, the bachelors are like 350, 400 square foot each. That's something that, you know, we'd make that judgment call when looking at the market data and bringing down the income quality on the model on it. So we actually do have the income quality below average. I mean, we are about 10% lower than what CMHC is cranking out, not for nothing.
Okay. All right. Now, sorry, you mentioned a couple times that you didn't inspect this property, but didn't somebody from the city inspect this property in May of 2023?
I'd have to double check, but I don't have anything in my presentation.
Okay. And then you'd mentioned bachelors. I suppose the type of tenancy leads to more wear and tear on these properties. Is that a fair comment? As a general comment for renters?
I mean, I don't want to totally generalize, but we've seen that, and part and parcel when we make those adjustments on the income quality, it also bumps the expense ratio a bit as well. So that's why typically they're lower on a per unit basis.
And can we agree then too that, and I don't disagree with what you're saying about the bachelor units that we see in the core, that's certainly fair comment, but would you agree with me that the family housing complexes, so the ones with a higher preponderance of 3 and even 4 bedroom units, typically take a greater deal of wear and tear, let's say?
I'd have to see some kind of report on that, in terms of the family units. Yeah,
Sure.
I don't know.
Okay, that's fine. Now, in terms of your cap rates, and Madam Chair, this, because we'll be talking about cap rates predominantly today, I'll sort of go through this once and then summarize if need be, but happy to speak to
Okay.
it if you'd like.
Great, thank you.
In terms of these cap rates, Mr. Brokus, and I'm looking at the panel, this is on page 6 of the assessor's evidence. I'm looking at this cap rate table. Mr. Brokus, the first thing that jumps out at me is that it says that the purpose for showing these cap rates is to illustrate the accuracy of the model, but isn't it true that on the very next page, we're seeing the city's multifamily range fall between 4.75 and 5.45, and then if that's the case, then only 3 of these 11 entries actually fall within that range. Is that a fair comment?
I mean, I'll take your word for it. There are a couple that are higher. There are a few that are lower, and then there are a few that are within the 20th to 80th percentile. So it's a dispersion.
Okay. So then these cap rates that you've provided on page 6, were these cap rates used in the model to generate the model cap rates for our properties on the docket today?
I'm not sure. I don't take part in the statistical modeling process.
Okay, and will we see workups on these properties today to see how you arrived at those cap rates?
I do not have the workups now.
Okay. Okay, so Madam Chair, I have a rebuttal document. Would you like me to go through that now?
We'll do the rebuttal at the end of the presentations.
Sure.
You'll both, yeah, okay, thank you.
Okay, so I have questions on these.
If for some reason I forget, please remind me you have rebuttal, but I'll make note of it here, yeah.
Perfect, will do, thank you. Okay, so I'll leave that for now. And again, Mr. Brokus, you mentioned the permits, and that's fine. But can we agree the last 4 permits were to create a community resource center, so a building that we typically see in these family housing complexes, and then a leasing office? Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay. I think I will leave it there, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. Brokus. Those are my questions.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Schultz, any questions for Mr. Brokus?
Asked and answered already, thank you.
Thank you.
No further questions.
Mr. Stephenson, do you have any questions for Mr. Brokus?
Just to confirm, the cap rate's model driven?
That is correct.
Yeah, and then number of suites, how does that usually affect cap rate? Like, it's like say 15 versus 100.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, typically as the buildings get larger, the pool of potential purchasers gets smaller in terms of their affordability into buying the place. And so what we're seeing is typically that translates into cap rates that are higher.
When there's a higher number of suites.
Yeah, all else being the same, the larger one's going to have a higher cap rate. That's at least what we've seen.
Okay, thank you. No further questions.
Yeah, and I just wanted to confirm that with the cap rate as well as all the other, the model is not taking into account the type of housing this is. It's just correct.
Yeah, because they're not running it on its highest and best use. And that's what we're.
Okay. Yeah, I just confirming that there's no particular override in the model for social housing. No. Okay.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you very much. All right, Mr. Story, please proceed with your presentation.
Perfect. Thank you, Madam Chair. Okay, 615 St. Anne's Road. We've established that we have a social housing family housing project in St. Patel. We have a number of buildings on site. There are 8. I visited this property would have been called 2.5 weeks ago or so. I visited all the properties on our docket for an exterior review, and we have a number of the properties were inspected, not by me, but rather by somebody else in our office. And I believe for all of them. Now, I asked the assessor for that reason. I'm not completely sure, but I believe that it was an inspection precipitated by assessor request, and I believe an assessor was attending. So not sure, but at any rate, we've certainly been inside these buildings. We've reviewed them from the outside. We'll talk a fair bit today about social housing. Our perspective, Madam Chair, is that Mr. Brooks is right. We don't look to the rents. They are rent geared to income. So it's based on means testing and ability to pay. So typically it's 30% of the tenant's income. So the rents that are being achieved are a function of the tenant's income and not market factors. And similarly, many of these properties were built by policy decisions and not by market factors. So you will find that as we go through these, a number of them will have obsolescences that are based on their use. So I agree, we're looking at them through a slightly different lens because they are social housing. And we do note, for example, that when we have a high propensity of, for example, 3 and 4 bedroom units with parking that is only 1-to-1 with those large number of units, that's more typical of social and not typical of market. So we have to make some adjustments. I provided some discussion on that point in my cap rate study, which I will get to. Okay, so once again, we're looking at the assessor's work, but I believe those rents are slightly high, but I do not dispute the fact that there's been maintenance work on this property to keep it viable, let's say. The main point, though, I guess, is that I'm not sure what condition this property was in prior to 2018 when the work was done. But by viewing it from the exterior, it does appear that there's been structural work done, and but the interiors are in varying states, varying. The condition is in some cases not great, we'll say. It would be considered poor condition. We have photos from our inspection, and typically we talk about the wear and tear that these units typically are subjected to, and it has to do with well, it's the nature of social housing, let's say. So we do account for that in our cap rate. In this case, based on the age, based on the type of construction, so we do consider 8 buildings on site to be a value negative. We've captured that in the cap rate. So if you have the ability to purchase let's call it a vertical apartment with 100 units in one tower, that would clearly be more efficient to run, to manage, and to operate than a housing complex like this with 8 buildings on site. So we have to consider that somewhere, and we've captured it in cap rate. Now, I asked the assessor about the rents. You'll see today, typically, when we look at social housing, the modeled rents, we generally see them somewhere between 65 to 75% of market, and that makes sense. I mean, the nature of an average is that you all have some above the average line and some below, and so it makes sense that these would be below average in terms of their income potential. We would also expect to see much higher expenses. So I would suggest that 55% to 65% for a property such as this would be typical. However, we have accepted the assessor's NOI in the interest of narrowing our issues, and we've captured the elevated risk profile of all of these properties in the cap rate. So the leading or the guiding methodology that we believe ought to be followed and supported by board orders that are included in our cap rate study is that we should look to a baseline market cap and then make adjustments upward for obsolescences, for condition, in some cases for location, and the main issue that we look to is these properties have no history of economic profit. So since 1976, let's say, this property has typically been operating at a loss, and then in 2018 there's an injection of capital, but that's once again to keep the property viable, not to have it compete on the open market, as we typically see when capital work is done on market apartments. So with all that being said, we've applied a cap rate of 6.25%. I will go through my cap rate study. It's fairly lengthy, so I will try to summarize it and hit the high points if I may. And I'll just flip over to that standalone document. It's called the Altus Group cap rate study for 2025. So if you all let me know when you're there, I can just sort of run through it quickly with you.
Okay, does everybody have that?
Yes.
Okay,
Yep.
yep, okay,
Perfect.
okay, go ahead, Jared, thanks.
Thank you very much. So firstly, just as a very broad comment, the capitalization rate is effectively tantamount to the numeric representation of risk for the property. So a property that has a higher risk profile, we'll say, ought to be applied a higher capitalization rate. And that's simply because the cap rate is representative of a rate of return on the investment. We talk a number of times here about the different methodologies for developing a cap rate. So you'll see in some cases here, we've taken sources from marketing documents. We've looked to historic records. We've looked to investor expectation in order to develop our cap rates. We've also looked to the broker reports, though the broker reports we approach with some caution, and we typically use them as a metric of cap rate compression or decompression between the cycles. So those are included in the cap rate study as well. So the main takeaways from the cap rate at April 1 of 2023 is that we have to consider the influence of three major items: the perceived risk, investor expectations on for appreciation, durability of income and return, and of course the required return of other investment vehicles. So it's interesting, in this cycle, at April 1 of 2023, a government-backed GIC was returning 4.5%. And climbing, quite frankly, but on the day it was 4.5%. So we have something of an issue, let's say, with the capitalization rates that are being supported by the assessor that are below 4.5%. It does not appear logical that on the day that an investor would liquidate an asset at a return of 4.5% on a real estate investment, which is less liquid, of course, than a GIC and carries a higher risk profile than a GIC, which effectively carries very little risk. So anything below 4.5%, we consider very well. We approach that with caution. Also note that inflation at the reference date between March and April of 2023 was running between 4.3 and 4.4%. So if real estate investments are indeed, as traditionally perceived as a hedge against inflation, it doesn't seem to make sense that we have cap rates that are anywhere near 4.5% or lower. If you follow me, please, to page 5. We have a document from the city of Winnipeg. It's called the Valuation of Income Producing Properties. And that is a public document made public to all of the ratepayers in the city of Winnipeg, and it's divided by asset class. And the commentary in that document states that capitalization rates for apartments range from 3.5 to 7.95%, with most falling between 4.75 and 5.45%. I'm going to suggest to you today that on all of the properties, save for Desmirong, which is a market apartment, that these would be on the higher end. So we're not suggesting 7.95 or really anything close to that, but we're typically going to present cap rates, or our position will support cap rates for these social housing properties that typically range somewhere between 5.75 and 6.25, 6.5, something like that. So it's not at the very high end of the city's admitted range, but it is on the higher end, and certainly should fall outside of the 80th percentile. We look at various factors that affect the cap rate in our analysis. We talk about type and construction. So in this case, I believe all the properties that we'll look at today are indeed wood frame row houses. Wood frame construction with a mix of siding and stucco interiors and multiple buildings that can create uncertainty, and certainly a higher amount of repair and maintenance can create a higher insurance expense. So we do consider that is germane to our discussion today. Building amenities, these properties, once again, they're not built to compete. They're built on policy, not based on market factors. So we don't typically see any of the amenities that we will see in market apartments. These are utility grade or more Spartan, let's say. We consider the durability and the quality of income. Well, we discussed this, I think, in our questioning with the assessor. The income quality should be considered as below average, and in many cases, I believe the city has adequately captured that. But we also have to consider that if that is the case, then there should be a corresponding adjustment to the capitalization rate. We talked about age, condition, parking, and suite mix. Now, in this case, these large complexes will typically have 1-to-1 parking or so. However, in market apartments, we'll typically see 3 and 4 bedroom units. Properties with a high propensity of 3 and 4 bedroom units will typically have a ratio that is better than 1-to-1. So that is to be considered. The age, generally, we're going to see units from the 70s and 80s today. So that speaks to economic life, though in this case, for this cap rate of 6.25 that we're presenting, we would be higher if the work had not been done on the property. Our income would likely be lower. So we do recognize that there's work that's been done to extend the remaining economic life. But there is also functional obsolescence in these properties. So we have to consider that as well. Location and external factors are not generally an issue on this docket. If they are, I'll bring them up, but generally we're in reasonably good or average areas in the city of Winnipeg. So there's no issue there. And we also consider number of suites. Now, the assessor has mentioned something about the number of suites, and if the number of suites are lower, then the cap rate might be higher. We have not necessarily seen that. In fact, you'll see when we go through some of these sales that we don't see effectively what we'll call like a bidding war for smaller apartments. And in many cases, there are price adjustments downward or price improvements for some of these. So I don't know that I understand the hypothesis of supply and demand that if an apartment is, $1 million or $2 million, there's a larger pool of buyers. Though I don't know that I've seen any evidence to bear out that the cap rates ought to be higher in those cases. In fact, in most cases, those apartments would typically be considered a more risky investment. So all that being said, we've provided a number of sales. These are sales that occurred in the market. Again, like the assessor, we're not using them as direct comparisons for any that we're looking at today. Social housing is a subset of market housing, let's say, and so we use these to develop a baseline cap rate, and then we adjust upward. But you can see that our cap rates effectively run from 5.26 to 7.11. They're summarized for you on page 11 of the cap rate study. I'm sure we'll talk about these in greater detail, but for the sake of brevity, Madam Chair, if you look on page 11, we've included our 6 sales. 2390 is an older sale, 2390 Phillips, but it's one that we've been talking about for a couple of cycles now. We have some comments and we have our conclusions, and the bulk of the brief includes our workups and the supporting materials that informed our research and our positions. So ultimately, our cap rates for this cycle, for baseline cap rates for market apartments, good quality and typically good locations, except for, I would say that 677 Maryland is not in good location or in good condition, but they run from 5.26 to 7.11. So I feel very comfortable applying a cap rate of 6.25 to this social housing family complex, leading us to an indicated market value of $10,410,000. And with that, I think I'll leave it there, Madam Chair, and I'm happy to take your questions, and I thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Brockes, any questions?
Yeah. So, my rebuttal comes after questions, right?
Yes.
Okay, cool. On page 9, of your cap rate rebuttal, I'm just gonna stick with that because that's what we're talking about.
On my cap rate report?
Yeah, on your cap rate report, sorry, yeah.
Yeah.
Cap rate report. So on page 9, you've got a list of various factors. You said affect the cap rate and building construction and parking and whatnot. Is there anything in this cap rate report that the board can see in terms of like establishing like a statistical relationship in terms of how each one of these factors would push a cap rate up or down?
It's a good question. So we don't model our cap rates. They're applied by agents, by people. So it's not a algorithmic application. So it would be based on best judgment, let's say. So there's not a I don't know how you would even go about creating a statistical relationship between quality of the building or something like that, or parking ratios. But these, I suppose what I can say is we look at once again, the baseline cap rates as supported by the guiding legislation, the municipal board orders that we've provided, and the writing of Mr. Richard Polton from the Appraisal Institute, suggesting that we ought to take a baseline cap rate and then adjust it upward for any of the factors that are present in social. But when we're looking at market apartments, those factors appear to be there as well. So a good example of what you're getting at, it would be Maryland. So we would typically say for that property. Now, I know that the city has used an effective age of something like 1970 on that property. I have a bit of an issue with it. I visited it many times. But ultimately, if we were to use a cap rate in appeal, or if we were to review this from a baseline, just pull this up here. I believe we're at 6.1 to 6.6 for that vintage. Yes, so pre-1946, and the building is indeed built in the original ages, the World War I era build. But if you were to even adjust that effective age to the 46 to 69 cohort chip, we would suggest that in a good location and good condition, we would apply 5.75 to 6.5, and you can see that property transacted at 7.11. So long answer to your question, but effectively, I don't know that there's a mathematical or statistical relationship, but there is evidence borne out by the market that properties that have these elevated risk profiles, we will typically see that reflected in the capitalization rate. And in this case, if we would apply something like 5.75 or 6% or something like that, maybe even higher, maybe 6.5 for this property, the sale is at 7.11. So there is a relationship between those adjustments to the cap rates as on review that is borne out by sales in the market.
Okay, and I know you mentioned Richard Polton. That is a book that was referring to the United States, wasn't it not?
He's from the Appraisal Institute in the United States, but he talks about income limited properties, and it would be the text that we typically follow for looking at properties that are limited dividend or income limited. So yes, he's from the States, but that certainly doesn't mean that the concept is foreign to our market.
And would he be referring to the purchase of those limited income properties as they are and run, and to continue being run as they are?
I'm not sure about that assumption. Sorry, is that you're suggesting if they were to be purchased and then repositioned in the market, that is?
Yeah, what I'm saying is you said that they're purchased and then there should be an adjustment up on the cap rate. And my question is, in that contention, is he saying that the person purchasing it is going to continue running it as a low income property?
I'm not sure. That's a good question. I'm not sure that there's any commentary about that, but I can say that, and the Polton discussion is again guiding methodology, but in terms of leading orders, we have also included municipal board orders, 2 of them. There's a great quote in here that talks about how social housing properties ought to be applied a higher cap rate as they are riskier properties and therefore require a higher rate of return, higher cap rate. So That's in the appendix, Madam Chair, of my brief. There are two different municipal board orders, and they talk very clearly. It's a conversation that's actually been going on for some time now. But generally, the assessor in the past has said, well, we've adjusted the income and we've adjusted the expenses, so the cap rate ought not to be adjusted. But the board, the two municipal board orders that are the guiding legislation suggest that limited income properties or social housing properties ought to be adjusted, ought to have an adjusted cap rate based on the fact that they are a higher risk asset, and therefore anyone who would purchase them would require a higher rate of return. So I appreciate what you're saying about Mr. Colton, Mr. Brokus, but the municipal board orders state pretty clearly that that the cap rates for social housing ought to be adjusted upward based on the risk profile of social housing.
Okay, and this will be my last question on this. Just in regards to those municipal board orders, I believe they start on page 52 of your brief for this property. If we could go there. So, assuming everyone is there.
Yeah, go ahead.
Are you guys, is everyone at 52 of his brief?
Yes.
Yep.
Okay, cool. Okay, so this is an order from 2022 in regards to some properties on Blake Street. If you flip with me to page 54, there's a highlighted section that the agent highlighted saying low investment grade properties warrant a higher yield than overall conventional apartment properties. The rates rise with the presence of each of the four characteristics attributable to these properties: low cost, low quality construction, advanced age, declining or blighted neighborhood, or low income tenancy. So my question would be to Mr. Story, would you consider, that the property that's had over $8 million worth of renovations to be low cost or low quality construction?
Yeah, so the quality of construction, Mr. Brokus, is it's wood frame. It's not, to be very careful. The work that was done is done to maintain the asset, but in terms of the build quality, it's a wood frame building. Not building, there are 8 wood frame buildings. So in terms of low cost or low quality construction, I see what you're getting at and I appreciate it, but wood frame would be on the lowest end of the quality spectrum in terms of build. They also talk about advanced age. Well, the building is built in 1976, so it's over 40 years old. So clearly, if the age life on an apartment like that is 50 or 60 years or something like that, it's getting to the end of its age life. So they spent the money to maintain it. No issue with, again, blighted neighborhood, as they mentioned. We don't have an issue there, but they do talk about low income tenancy. So I would suggest to you that 3 of the 4 elements that they outline are indeed there. If the property were in, if they had not done the work to maintain the envelope, we would be using a higher cap rate. And I neglected to mention, we do have a number of photos. There's a lot of photos in here showing the range of quality in the interiors of this property. So I won't go through each of them with you, but you can see them. These properties, and this is from 2023, so 5 years after that, those permits, they do take a great deal of wear and tear. They do constitute a higher risk, and they ought to be applied a higher cap rate. Now we're not using 6.5% or 7%. We're using 6.25, and I think that's very fair in this instance.
Okay, thank you very much. Those are my questions.
Thank you, Mr. Stephenson. Any questions?
No questions at this time. Thank you.
Okay, Ms. Schultz, any questions?
No questions at this time. Thank you.
And I have no questions, so we'll move to the rebuttal. So Matthew, you said you had rebuttal as well?
I submitted some cap rate rebuttal.
Okay, all right, so we'll do the Mr. Story's rebuttal first, so
All right.
Have those been
uh,
uploaded?
yeah, just like, can you let us know, is it in the agenda now, guys?
No.
We're moving it right now.
Okay, let us know when it's there and then we'll refresh.
If you refresh the OneDrive folder, you should see.
Okay, thank you.
Matthew, as well, I just sent you an email. You should be able to see that with the applicant's reply.
Let's see here.
I see the mine's uploaded.
I'm not, I didn't get it the first time. I'll refresh again, sorry. Oh, yeah, I've got it, thank you. Mr. Stephenson, do you have it? Sorry, you're on mute. Do you have it? Do you have the, you're still on mute, sorry.
I'm
Okay.
sorry about that. I'm looking at it here.
Oh, you got it. Okay, great. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, and Mr. Rockus, you have it? Yep.
Yes, I do.
All right, Mr. Story, please proceed.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Okay, which was very quick. I think we touched on a number of these, but first point we'd like to illustrate here, Madam Chair, is that the cap rates that are now, and just to be very clear, we are rebutting the cap rates that the assessor has put into evidence in this chart. We don't have any details about the inputs into the model. So this is simply based on, I believe it's page 5 of the assessor's brief in this instance. And I will ask that my comments carry forward. This will be comment to all of the files on our docket today. The city of Winnipeg's cap rates of 3.46 to 5.74 give us some pause. I noted that the interest rate was 4.5% at the reference date. I mentioned that a GIC was returning 4.5%, and I believe it was rising, and it likely would have been known. But ultimately, even if you're conservatively suggesting that a 4.5% return was available on the day as of April 1, 2023, then a cap rate of anything below 4.5% does not really hold up from our perspective. And it's you know, we can look at the interest environment and we can say, well, that's at a higher rate than what had typically been what we've typically seen. However, the purpose or the purpose of the exercise today is to determine what a knowing purchaser and a knowing seller would have bought or sold a property for at the reference date of April 1 of 2023. And if the interest rate at that time was 4.5%, then anything below that should be approached with some caution based on its viability. So that deals with 727 Sargent and 241 Young. Again, those are unusually low. I would suggest that those are likely outliers, and without some data to see how those cap rates were derived, we would ask that those not be considered. In terms of 459 Sargent Avenue, it would appear that the city has used the historical income in their stabilization. We've included the MLS listing. It states that the annual gross income is 101,142 with an average monthly rent of $740 per unit per month and a parking rent of $40 per stall per month. So that's not, it's a little bit low. It's certainly not too high. So we've used those figures. We have to consider based on the Appraisal Institute of Canada, they do consider the future income of income producing real estate. So historical data or market data is relevant insofar as it helps interpret current anticipations, but we have to consider that the principle of anticipation should also be considered. So when we look at the MLS listing, and when we recalculate the cap rate with the rents that would have been known and the appreciation that would have been known at the time of sale, that cap rate becomes 5.79%. That's on page 5. We've worked that up. You can see it very clearly on our page 5. Moving forward, and then once again on page 6. Now I believe the assessor has this somewhere in their evidence, or maybe it'll be in the rebuttal, or it certainly was in the past. But if you look on page 6, if you go about, well, almost to the very end of the page, you can see a highlighted section that says gross income. They were indeed advertising that the gross income ought to be 101,142. So we've used this as this is a circular that went to the market. You can see that anybody purchasing this property would not have been the likelihood that they would have been looking at historical income versus potential or future income. I would suggest to you that the purchase decision was likely predicated on that higher gross income. I've made a comment about the hypothesis regarding price improvements for smaller properties. If you see if you looked with me, please, page 6 at the very, very top right corner, you can see the original price was $1,150,000. There was a price improvement to $1,050,000 with an eventual sale price of $1 million even. So the hypothesis that there's a large pool of bidders outbidding each other and driving those prices up. This is just one example where that does not appear to be borne out by the market. 150 Hendon. We have had the opportunity to interview the purchaser. We get a good sense of their motivation when purchasing the property. The city has not provided a stabilization for the cap rate, but I would presume that they're using historical income. The vendor did some work on the property in the prior 2 years, and they applied to the RTB. And those RTB increases, those above the line increases, were indeed granted. We've included the RTB orders. We have permission from the purchaser to include them here. So ultimately, I won't go through each of them, but you can see that we have the RTB orders. We know what the purchaser's expectations were in reviewing the RTB orders and in speaking with them. And we've calculated that cap rate for you. We've actually included it in our study. So it comes to 5.42% based on our work up on page 8. Okay, now that's a lot of information here. And actually, it's interesting. I noticed this just yesterday, but on that income and expense mailer, they actually say this is on page 14. We took possession of this property June 1st and have no historical records. So the notion that they're using historical income is probably erroneous. I would suggest to you that there's substantial evidence suggesting that the purchaser was using the anticipated rents based on an adjustment to the RTB, which were known to them at the time of purchase. Okay, so that's Hendon. Very quickly. Again, 677 Maryland. I've worked now for the past 3 owners of this property. There have been 3 sales in the past, I'm going to say 6 or 7 years, and each sale is declining. The purchase price is declining with each sale. I believe the city is using the previous sale. So if there are 3 sales that are germane to our talk today, they're using the second one and not the most recent one. We've included the most recent sale. We calculated a cap rate of 7.11%. Okay, 2390 McPhillips. That is a cap rate that the city is. We've been talking about at the board for 2 cycles now. But effectively, Madam Chair, this property was purchased with rents. It was purchased by a real estate investment trust with rents that were indeed below CMHC at the time of purchase. the rents were raised on acquisition. Now, we weren't able to talk about that in the last cycle as that was post-reference information, but now that the window has widened, we can indeed talk about what happened after the sale or after the acquisition, but before the reference date. We can see that the rents were increased, so just mathematically, that cap rate adjusts upward when the rents are adjusted upward as well. So we are, just by applying CMHC rents, you end up at I believe it's a 5.59 or 5.6 cap on that property when you adjust for appropriate market behavior. Now, the last couple here, 700 St. Mary's, that property was purchased with the intention to renovate. We have an attached letter, which didn't use that cap rate, that's our position. This is a sale from the last cycle, so it probably has less application to our discussion today, but since we're talking about each of them, we did want to make that point. And then the last one on Arden, the property was renovated after the purchase, so it's an older sale from 2019, but our positions that property was likely purchased with the intention to renovate, and in that case, that cap rate should not be used without some adjustment. And of course, the thought process behind that is that if a property is purchased with the intention to renovate, they're not purchasing the current rent in place, but rather the economic opportunity to raise those rents on acquisition. So those are our comments about the assessor's cap rates, Madam Chair. You have our document. I'll leave it there, and I will ask that my comments follow through to the balance of the docket. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Brockis, questions on the rebuttal?
All right, I have a couple. I'll try to go quick on it. On page 5, you use the gross potential rents from MLS on your stabilization for 459 Sargent, correct?
Yeah, that's right.
And you got that from the MLS ad on the following page?
Yes, we did. 740 a door on
yeah.
average.
Yeah.
Plus
So
yeah.
did you not, well, they also said the not operating income was 74,775. Did you not take their word on that as well?
No, because that when we look at the historic expenses, now these are items like insurance, an appropriate management fee. We stabilize those expenses. So if you look to the this is line 32. In 2019, historical expenses are running 53.9, 2020 46.6, and then 45.6. So we're slightly lower at 41.1%. But if there's a particular input in that stabilized expense line, I'd be interested to know, because those look to be well in line from my perspective. And I believe that's likely pretty close to how the city might assess this property. So I think we're good on the expenses. But I do appreciate the comment. I'm not sure where that figure came from. Those expenses, I think they're I don't think they're correct, quite frankly. I think they're missing something there, but we've stabilized them, and I think it makes sense.
Okay, and then on Hendon, you mentioned they got like an RTB bump like right at the time of the sale. Is that correct?
The RTB orders have an effective date of June 1, 2021, which is the possession date.
Okay. And so this RTB, it was dated afterwards. It was dated 14th of July. That would have been after the sale.
I'm not sure how that works, to be quite honest with you. I don't know. That's something that tweaked my interest as well. But they do have an effective date. I suppose they're able to issue an effective date that is retroactive to the issuance date. But it's the RTB orders, you can see very clearly, they have an effective date of June 1, 2021.
Okay, and then you provided some, like I'm just looking on page 12. You provided bumps for unit 10 and unit 37. Do they renovate every unit in the building and get bumps for every unit, or just these 2 units?
Yeah, no, so what we've done here, we didn't include every order, but we've included one for each type of unit, right? So you can see in the top left corner, those are sample orders for a bachelor and for a 2-bedroom. So yes, I believe they were able to adjust them for each unit. That's my understanding.
Okay, and then just on, let me see here. I mean, the panels kind of, you've ever heard our disagreement on the income of McPhillips, and there's no townhouses, so I think I'll actually just leave my questions there. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Ms. Schultz, any questions for Mr. Brockett or for Mr. Story on his rebuttal?
Asked and answered already, thank you.
Okay. Mr. Stephenson?
No questions, thank you.
Okay, and I have no questions. So, Mr. Brockett, you said you have rebuttal evidence as well that you submitted?
Yeah, I did.
Okay, Fran and Tristan, let us know when it's there and we'll refresh again.
It should already be there.
Should be there, okay. Sorry, I'm having a little bit of a technical issue here, so I will get it in a second here.
Oh.
My apologies.
I don't see the city's rebuttal loaded.
Yeah, I'm not seeing it either. I do have,
I don't have anything either.
yeah, I just have Altus rebuttal.
Yeah, so the file name will be Altus 2025 cap rate study sales analysis -ANT rebuttal. So it'll be near the top.
Oh, there it is.
Oh, it starts with Altus cap rate. Okay, got it.
Yeah.
Thank you. You gave it a funny name, Matthew. Okay, does everybody have it now?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Mr. Story, you have a copy?
I do indeed, yes.
Okay, Matthew, please go ahead.
All right, thank you very much. So, judging by the familiar faces, I know you've seen this before, so I'll try and make this as expedient as possible and ask that this presentation apply to all the files on the docket today. Thank you. Okay, so basically, Altus has, well, they got Hendon in their report now, so I suppose this has to be updated. But for the 5 other sales, our main piece of contention is for the first 4. They either have only 1 year of stabilized income and expenses for the first 3, or for 100 Maryland, they don't even have any historical actuals, but yet they've calculated a cap rate on it. These are the cap rates, unsubstantiated cap rates that they're using presumably to, you know, come up with groups for year built and then assign them to the properties on the docket today and then apply various premiums to them. So we're just saying that they're not standing on anything. And then the last, and then on McPhillips, you see their stabilization on page 10 and mine on page 11. I use the actual income in place prior to the sale. On page 11, it stabilized at 471. And then they use the CMate C October 2020 rent for, like, they just estimated the income. And so when you jump the income 200,000, the cap rate's going to change when you use the same expenses. So I'm just saying that their income is inconsistent with what was reported at the time of the sale, what would have been on the table at the time of the sale, the numbers that they would have been negotiating on, not the numbers that didn't exist. So we're saying that our cap rate for that one is more accurate. Knowing that you guys have seen this before, I'm just going to leave that right there so we can get to the questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Story, any questions for Mr. Baracus?
Yeah, just a couple, and I think we've touched on most of this, Madam Chair, so I'll be speeding here, but Mr. Baracus, you made a comment about 2390, something about negotiations. Were the rents raised on acquisition?
The rents did go up afterwards, not nearly as high as you estimated, and the expenses jumped as well. So what I'm just saying is you can't a la carte one part of the income. Like, we're basically looking at a la carting one part of the income calculation after the time of the sale while ignoring the other components. So, yeah.
Okay, and will you be producing that new stabilization with the, you said there's an increase to the rents, and I know that that's true, but I don't know about the expenses. So will that be presented for our review?
No, that occurred after the sale, so no.
Okay, so if the rents were increased after the sale, would that not lead you to believe that the purchaser, who was a real estate investment trust, an eligible purchaser, purchased that property with the intention to raise those rents? Is that not a fair comment?
Well, I mean, yeah, they're gonna want to get the rents as high as possible, but the
Right.
expenses also go up as well. So the net operating income really wasn't that different, and the cap rate was actually below my calculation if you just look at that 1 year, which I don't like to do. So I'm saying that the years leading up to the sale, that's what the vendor and the purchaser would have had on the table to look at if they're going to be able to raise some rents, and then, you know, that's what happened after the sale, but we're looking at pre-sale information.
Okay. Okay, so then just last question then. So the city is of the opinion that the principle of anticipation, which is fundamental to cap rate derivation, is not has no application with the Lady Joyce at 2390 McPhillips. Is that a fair comment?
I would say that only anticipating the income and not anticipating an increase in the expenses as well does not calculate a more accurate cap rate than just looking at the income and expenses prior to the time of the sale.
I think I'll leave it there, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Stevenson, any questions?
No questions, thank you.
Ms. Schultz, any questions?
No questions, thank you.
And I have no questions. So, Mr. Baracus, any need for summation?
I mean, the property had over $8 million worth of renovations. I mean, I'm sure some suites are beat, but it had a bunch of structural, exterior, interior. There's an HRV unit in the basement, and a picture of one of Mr. Story's pictures. Like, they did a bunch of work. I've been to a bunch of these Manitoba housings. When they get fully done, they all have that same finish, same cabinet, same flooring, etc. So I think we're low on this one based on the cap, and I think we need to come out and take a look at it. So thank you for your time on this one.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Story.
Yes, Madam Chair, thank you. So very briefly, the assessors mentioned the work that's been done or renovation work. Now, that is, we will argue, a symptom of the use. That's a required. Those are required maintenance items to maintain the viability of the asset. Typically, when we see a large capital investment into a market apartment, it's so that they are able to compete with other apartments in the vicinity and achieve higher rents. That is not the case here. Once again, These are properties that are built under the mandated housing as many low-income folks as possible. They're not meant to compete. And the work that was done here was to maintain them to a certain standard. Again, that work was done in 2018. You can see our photos, and Mr. Brocus is quite right. Once the work is typically done on these properties, they're still Spartan, but they're refreshed. But the amount of wear and tear on these properties is extremely high. So respectfully, we would suggest that we have considered the permits, we have considered the work, we have visited the property, we have the photos for you, and on a site-specific basis, if this property had not received a great deal of work, we'd be using a much higher cap rate. Ultimately, we feel very comfortable using a 6.25 cap rate on this property. And again, it is not applied algorithmically. It is done by real people visiting the property and analyzing it on a site-specific basis. So we do continue to believe that social housing properties ought to be applied a higher than market cap rate based on their higher risk profile, and for a number of the reasons that we've presented verbally and in our written submission. So we do respectfully submit that consideration be given to our submission based on adjustments to social housing as a subset of market housing. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, that was a lot of information, which it says you both you gentlemen, thank you very much. And you said that the panel will consider that moving forward. So hopefully we can go a little quicker after this. So since that was a lot of information, let's take a break here. So we'll take a recess to between 10:30, 10:35, okay?
Perfect.
Thank you. Thanks. Thank you very much. I will call the hearing back to order, and we'll proceed to the next item on our agenda, number 2, which is 565 St. Anne's Road. So Mr. Baracus, please proceed when you're ready.
All right, thank you very much. File 24-3007, roll number 0800466540, 565 St. Anne's Road. Again, roll your 2025 assessed value, $5,566,000. Again, it's a Manitoba housing row house between Sterling and Meadowood off St. Anne Road. 1989, no effective year built on it, 42 suites, 42 outdoor parking spots. Page 2, no recent subject sale history. Page 3 shows the breakdown is pretty even between 2 and 3 bedroom units. Average monthly rent per unit, $1,196. When you run it through the modeled 52.59% expense ratio and a 4.95 cap, you get our estimated market value, which comes out to about $132,523 per unit. So like on the last one, it's predominantly a cap rate discussion. But I got some comparables on page 4. Probably recognize them. These are the same as the last property. Again, this time Meadowood got put in comparable number 2. Again, I asked the panel not consider that one for the reasons I previously stated. Yeah, okay, so cap rate evidence here on page 5 is the same as before. We discussed that. And the last property, and then on page 6 shows that we are 89% of the CMHC rents for townhouses based on the calculator, and the source table is at the bottom of page 6. I put the cap rate chart in twice. Bonus copy. Page 8 is the cap rate chart again that you've seen before. So page 9 of the meeting excerpts, and this one again also backs on to Seine River here off St. Anne's. Some just aerial photography, some multiple buildings, and there was some permits as well. These permits look a bit different. We got different programs in which permits are captured. the permits, or whichever, rather I can access them. These permits weren't in one program, so when I dug deeper, I found that they'd done some work as well. The issue date was that would be June 2016. So multiple buildings. We've got 5 permits here, and they're doing the same thing in regards to upgrading the building, enclosure, removal, exterior finishes, walls, roofs, air barrier, etc., replacement of windows and doors, foundation and framing for new architectural build-out. Not sure what that is. And they're framing for new cabinet, replacement of existing HRV, and revisions to the interior ducting. So they're doing a lot of work to these places. They're keeping them up. Haven't inspected this one, and unfortunately, Google didn't really. I wasn't able to have access to it and take a look, as well as the last property. But for each building, it's 344,000 on the declared permit value for 5 buildings. So when you're looking at back to our valuation on page 3, it's about 132 per unit. I mean, based on the level of work, $1.7 million worth of permitted work in 2016. Again, this is another one that would warrant an inspection, just to come check it out. I do think the cap rate on this one is more appropriate than the last one, so I feel strongly that the model valuation is accurate based on the information that we have. That's my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Story. Any questions?
Yes, just very quickly, Madam Chair. Mr. Brokus, you have not inspected this property? Is that what you said?
Yes.
Okay, but did somebody in May, same question, did somebody not inspect this property with Altus in May of 23?
I do not have any information in my report to that effect.
Okay, but in your, I suppose when you're creating your brief and you're going through the records, does the city have a record of inspecting this property in May of 23?
Let me see here. I do not. I know different departments in terms of like permitting and electrical and whatnot probably would have been there given the extent of the work they did, but I don't have any notes. If someone did, maybe they didn't leave a note, but I don't have anything in my evidence to substantiate that.
Okay, to be clear, I'm asking about assessors, but if you don't have a note about it, that's
Yeah.
fine.
Yeah.
Now this is all modeled as well, correct?
Yeah.
Okay. And then I don't necessarily think that market value per suite is a good metric for social housing, but I couldn't help but notice that the assessment is coming out at 132.5 per door, and that would make it, if you looked at your sales, that would make it the second highest sale per door when comparing these market inputs. Does that not seem high to you then?
Well, I mean, these are 2 and 3 bedroom townhouses. So you're getting more than your standard apartment unit. So it doesn't give me pause actually at all.
Okay, and getting more rent, is that what you're saying?
Well, I'm saying, yeah, I mean, it's bigger, so it's more attractive to potential tenants, so they can ask more.
Okay, and again, that CMHC average, same question from the previous file. If the model is kicking out 89% of the CMHC average, are we led then to believe that the income quality has not been adjusted in the model to capture the fact that it is social housing? Is that a fair comment?
Yeah, we don't make adjustments for social housing because social housing is not the highest and best use in terms of the maximally productive aspect of that principle. So that's not how we're assessing it. That's why we don't look at the actuals.
And to be clear, there have not been highest and best use studies done on these properties, clearly.
I
That's your-
mean, sometimes these places run at a deficit without subsidy. So, I mean, if we looked at their actuals, like sometimes the value, it could calculate like a value that's close to our at zero without help from the government. So I wouldn't say that this is the best way of doing things.
It covered many of the questions that are germane to this docket in the first cycle or the first property manager. So I'll just ask that my questions from the previous file carry forward, and with that, I will leave my questions there. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Schultz, any questions?
None at this time, thank you.
Mr. Stephenson?
No questions, thank you.
Just Mr. Baracus, just quickly, with multifamily, when you're dealing with a smaller property like this, does that affect the cap rate, the size of the property?
Well, I mean, like I'm not involved in the modeling process, but like while like newer build larger apartments, we find they do also have lower caps because they're very attractive. We find that size definitely, at least in my experience, looking at properties on a site-specific basis, the small ones have a bigger pool of potential purchasers. You know, me and my wife can go with my friend and their wife, and if the property's around like $1 million, say we've got some equity, want to buy like an investment, that's something that more of those people can get in the action. They bid against each other, the price goes up, as such cap rate will drop. On the big guys, we're cut out of the market, right? So it's only institutional investors, so that's gonna push that cap rate up. So yeah, I do strongly feel, based on what I've seen in my experience working with apartments over the past 10 years, that that's definitely a factor.
Okay, thank you very much. All right, Mr. Story, please proceed with your presentation.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Okay, so 565 St. Anne's. Once again, I visited this property in September, and there was a full inspection. I believe it was completed with the assessment department. Excuse me. Can't be certain of that, but I believe that is the case, and that was in May of 23. Won't belabor this, but I will ask the panel to review the photos. We have interior photos of these properties, so we haven't simply modeled the assessments, but rather visited them, reviewed them on a site-specific basis, provided photos. You can see that this one, there again, it's the baseline build for these properties are utility grade. They're very Spartan in terms of their finish. Again, they're not meant to compete with other assets. They're built by policy to house people in the community. So they're built to let's say to a standard that is not that is not meant to compete, or is not meant to even bear any resemblance to a market apartment. So we have to consider that. Again, we have two buildings. They're wood framed, they're row houses. We've talked a lot about the adjustment for cap rates for social housing, but we too do also typically regard row houses as riskier, as the expenses are typically higher in market apartment than in market apartments. And you can imagine you've got more buildings to take care of. They're each sort of self-contained units. They have their own hot water tanks, their own HVAC, their own entrances. They're a different bird than regular market apartments, let's say. So than regular vertical apartments. So we have a couple of factors here where we will apply what the assessor is calling cap rate premiums. Again, we're considering the fact that it is social housing. It has no history of economic profit. And we would suggest to you that any of the work that's being done or that has been done is indeed reflected in the rents. Those rents that are running at 90% of CMHC are very high in the social housing universe for assessment purposes. And I believe as we work through this docket, you'll see that a great number of the properties where they have not been ameliorated or maintained to sustain them, you'll see that those rents are indeed lower than what we're looking at today. So the cap rate that has been applied here of 4.9% is extraordinarily low. This would be very low for a market apartment. It does not appear to bear any resemblance to what how a social housing property ought to be assessed. So we've applied a cap rate of 6.25%. I apologize, on page 18, there's a typo in my cap rate discussion that should have been adjusted. I have the assessor's cap rate wrong and mine wrong. It's from our template. At any rate, we are using a 6.25 cap. Once again, we have a wood frame row house. It's a social housing project with no history of economic profit. The building has no amenities. We would consider the durability and the quality of income weak. We would consider the condition to be inferior and the suite mix to be atypical of market. Once again, we've talked a lot about social housing and the fact that it's built by policy and not by market conditions. And we will see, especially with these types of properties that we have today, these family-oriented social housing project builds, typically from the 70s and 80s. They'll have a suite mix that is not typical of what we'll see in the market, and that again is an obsolescence due to their use, and that's not curable. So we have to consider that in our valuation. Ultimately, that expense ratio of 52.6 is low. We would expect, once again, somewhere at a minimum 55. We would likely cap it at about 65%. But that's the window that we would expect. Again, those rents appear high. However, accepting that NOI put forth by the city and adjusting to a more appropriate cap rate of 6.25 leads us to an indicated market value at the reference date of 4,407,988, which we then of course round to 4,408, and that's about $105,000 a door. That makes a lot more sense when we look at the sales and the sales on a cost per door. Though I am cautious to discuss cost per door with social when they require a great deal of work. In this case, the work has been done it was 2016. So 105,000 per door is squarely where we would expect that assessment to fall. So once again, the balance of my brief includes the municipal board orders that talks about social housing inherently being a higher risk investment, requiring a higher yield to an investor, therefore requiring a higher cap rate. We've included some discussion about social housing. We talked about Mr. Polton's comments about income limited properties. And then once again, we've included a great deal of photos here for you to see. And again, this just speaks to the wear and tear and supports our cap rate of 6.25%. So again, Madam Chair, we do respectfully submit the value for this exercise not exceed 4,408,000. And I'll ask that my comments regarding social housing as the general comments that I've made carry forward, but we do respectfully submit that the value not exceed 4,408,000. And with that, I'm happy to take your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Barakis. Any questions?
No questions, thank you.
Ms. Schultz, any questions?
No questions, thank you.
Mr. Stephenson?
No questions, thank you.
And I have no questions. So gentlemen, any summation on this, Mr. Barakis?
No, thank you.
Okay. Mr. Story?
Yeah, just very quickly, we do continue to believe that a site-specific review of the property is warranted and an adjustment to the cap rate to capture its history as a social housing asset be given weighted consideration, and the cap rate ought to be adjusted on that basis. And a thank you.
Thank you. Okay, thank you. We will move on to item 3 on the agenda, which is 27 Morrow Avenue. So Mr. Barakis, please proceed when you're ready.
Okay, one moment, please. I just misplaced one of my files here
That's fine. Take your time.
and expedite things as much as possible. Okay, so let me get going. File 24-2839, 27 Moore Avenue, roll number 0800217190. It's Manitoba Housing again, not-for-profit, row housing is an 88, no effective year built on it. 50 suites, 50 outdoor parking. On it, it's on Morrow, between Niagara and Fernwood east of St. Anne's. So this one we do have, according to my notes, some disagreement in terms of expenses and cap. From my notes, doesn't look like income is a dispute. So on page 2, no recent sale history. Income value summary on page 3 shows the model workup 495 cap 50 units, pretty even distribution of 2 and 3. Average monthly rent $1,130. Model expense ratio 55.02 with the cap $5,940,000. And that comes out to $118,800 on a per suite basis. Again, same rent comparables. This time Meadowwood has moved over to the 3rd column by model this time. But again, please don't consider it. Our average monthly rent is below 1, 2, and 4, which are the market apartments. Here we are on page 5 now. Again, CMHC, I did the same analysis, just plop this property in, and we're at 85% in terms of modeled to potential as per the chart here. All right, so and then 6 and 7 cap rate information, and 8, that would be the municipal excerpts. Page 9 shows some pics of the place, just from the exterior aerial. Here we are, and then on page 10, some Google image pictometry. So going back to the workup on page 3, we're only at 119 per unit roughly, and we're 15% less than the CMHC rents. So I feel that's a pretty fair assessment, especially looking at a market value per suite basis for 2 and 3 bedroom units in St. Vital townhouses. That's my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Story, any questions?
Yes, indeed. Mr. Brokus, same question, did you or anyone from the department visit this property?
I don't have a record of that in my workup, no.
Okay, and the assessment is all modeled?
Yep.
And you don't have any permits for this one?
No, I dug around, but I couldn't find any permitted work. I mean, sometimes places get fixed up without permits being taken, but I don't have record of that either, having not inspected it. But again, we don't have permits like we did for the other one.
Yeah. Those are my questions, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Stephenson, any questions?
No questions at this time, thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Schultz, any questions?
No questions at this time, thank you.
And I have no questions. So Mr. Story, please proceed when you're ready.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Okay, so we are on Morrow. We have another family housing complex. Now it's there are technically 3 buildings on site, but they are all there's a number of connected units. So it's like 3 long sort of lodge style townhouse units on site. So it is technically 3 buildings, but that's because they have conjoined walls, but it is indeed a multi-building unit. So not typical of market, and frankly, not totally typical of what we see in social housing today. Typically, when we see the mindset around not-for-profit housing and social housing has changed since the 70s and 80s. We don't typically build these large complexes anymore. Now we're more likely to see an integration of affordable and deeply affordable units into market or with a greater degree of integration. So there is some obsolescence there in terms of these large row house developments. We don't typically see them anymore. They're again, they're not maximally efficient, let's say. So we have 29 two-bedroom units and 21 three-bedroom units. This is again, it's on the north side of Morrow between St. Anne's and the Seine River. This is called the Alpine Place section of St. Patel. So if you go down Morrow, basically this entire street is market apartments, and at the very end there is a Salvation Army building, and then this is the building right next to it. So it's a lot of social welfare type assets operating in this very specific section of Morrow. I visited the property again in September. An agent conducted a full interior inspection in May of 23. So a number of these properties were actually inspected. I believe somebody from the assessment department was there as well, but can't confirm. But that's fine. So ultimately, follow me please to my page 21. We had better data in terms of expenses for this property. And as I had mentioned before, we would typically expect somewhere between 55 to 65%. That's precisely what's happened here. You can see that the stabilized expenses are indeed 57.3%. So we're accepting the rents put forth by the city, even though they are on the higher end from our perspective, specifically for social. But we've applied a higher expense ratio, though only marginally. The city's using 359. We're at call it 360. We're at 375. So it's not a huge difference. So of course, a big part of that, if we were to look at this property as a market apartment, there would be a management fee that that isn't recorded by Manitoba Housing, and that would be about 32,682. Everything else appears to be in good order. From a ratio perspective, our utilities are running at 22.7%. That is not out of line with what we would expect to see with a building of this vintage. So I've created the stabilized single year for you on page 21. So ultimately, we have a difference in the NOI, and that's solely based on the application of what we believe to be more appropriate market expenses. And again, we're using a 6.25 cap rate. Now, I think that 6.25 cap is low. I think 6.5 in this case is probably more reasonable. However, I've submitted 6.25, which leads us to 4,462,402, which we would then round to 4,462. For interest sake, at a 6.5 cap, we come to 4,291. I think that's the range, somewhere between, call it 4.3 to 4.5 million. That makes more sense given the specific nature of the property. We have an R&M breakdown on page 22 indicating an R&M allowance per suite of 1,500 per door, which is exactly in line with what we'd expect to see for this property. So ultimately, we would respectfully submit that the value not exceed 4,462,000. And again, that's based on a cap rate that I believe to be slightly low for this property at 6.25. However, on balance, it does make sense, even if it is a touch high from my perspective. The balance of the brief includes a number of photos. You can see the same Spartan utility grade interior. And yeah, I'll just ask my comments regarding the social housing, family housing complexes carry forward. And of course, the brief also includes the municipal orders that I mentioned a number of times here. So I think I will leave it there, Madam Chair. And ultimately, we feel very supported in our request to reduce the value to 4,462,000. And with that, I'm happy to take your questions, and I thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Baracus, any questions?
Yeah, just in regards to the workup, which is on, sorry, page 21.
Yep.
So the utilities, they're included in the rent for, like, they're covered by the rent of Manitoba Housing, right?
Well, yeah, because it's rent geared to income. So it's not based on, it's based on the tenant's ability to pay, so it's atypical in that way. But
Okay,
yes, they would be considered what we would call hot rents, I suppose, if you were to compare it to a market scenario.
and these buildings, they would be separately metered, right?
Well, that's a good question. I can't say if they are or not. Generally, they would be in market apartments. That would be typical. I can't confirm whether these ones are or not, but I'd be speculating. I'm not sure.
Okay, so then typically, would the owner not, given that they're separately metered, be passing on, they wouldn't be paying for the heat and water on the
well,
units?
Yeah, somebody's paying for the utilities. So in what we'll call budget rentals, we will typically see hot rents. Check in your rent comps. I didn't put rent comps in mine because we're accepting the rent, but let's see very quickly. So one of yours here on Weatherstone, or is that the one we're not including? That's the one that you removed from your rent comps?
On Weatherstone? Oh
Yeah,
yeah,
so-
Meadowwood's the one I'm not.
Oh, Meadowwood, sorry. Yeah, so okay, so if you look at Weatherstone,
Yeah.
that is a hot rent as well. So it's not uncommon when we see apartments, row houses, whatever sort of multifamily rentals that are renting on the lower end of the scale. It's not uncommon to see inducements such as hot rents, cable packages, things like that. So I agree with you that it would be up to the owner as to how they would operate, but typically when we see rents that are on the lower end of the scale and budget-friendly apartments, let's say in the market and on the private side, hot rents or rents that include utilities are not atypical at all.
Okay, and then just one more question. Just looking at the pictures, it looks like this place had a bunch of work done to it in terms of like millwork and flooring and exterior, windows, soffits, doors, roof. Would you consider applying an effective age to the property considering the extent of work they did?
Well, what I would say, and I'm always, well, okay, your first comment that it looks like a bunch of work has been done. It looks like to me there's clearly no air conditioning, but a bunch of open windows. Flooring that's what we used to call linen tile. That's inexpensive flooring. The cabinetry does not look to be high grade. The fridges and stoves, and you know this as well as I do from visiting a number of these properties, are typically they're not. I mean, they're pretty old based on what we would expect in a typical apartment. And in terms of millwork, by millwork you mean the cabinets?
Yes.
Yeah, no, I think the cabinets are pretty utility grade. I wouldn't suggest that those are high quality. I would suggest that this is all Spartan utility grade finish. Now, in terms of applying an effective age, I think that what you would probably do in the market is not. You would suggest that the property was built in the late 1980s and then capture any work that was done, but to say that the effective age is 1999 or 1995 or some such thing, that would be a very, very subjective adjustment, and I'm cautious about that because from a modeling perspective, from my understanding is if that effective year changes in your model, then all of a sudden all the rates and allowances go out of whack. So I'm not saying that they haven't done general upkeep since 1988, but I would be very cautious in suggesting that an effective age ought to be applied here, based on the fact that it would, I think, distort the assessment.
All right, thank you. Those are my questions.
Okay. Ms. Schultz, any questions?
No questions at this time, thank you.
Mr. Stephenson?
No questions, thank you.
And I have no questions. So any need for summation on this property, Mr. Brockes?
No, thank you.
Okay, Mr. Story?
Yeah, we once again feel very strongly that the social housing is different than market housing and should be treated as such for assessment purposes. We're supported with the study that we've presented to you along with the board order, so we feel very comfortable with a 6.25 cap, though it may be somewhat low on this property. We respectfully submit that this property be treated as a social housing asset on a site-specific basis, and thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we will move on to item number 4 on our agenda, which is 26 Hastings Boulevard. Mr. Baracus, please proceed when you're ready.
Okay, thank you very much. File 24-2970, row number 08003318 26 Hastings Boulevard. Again, it's another Manitoba Housing commercial row house in St. Vital. It's on the southeast corner of Hastings and Dunkirk. 2 buildings, 2 stories. Actual year built 1977, no effective year built. 30 suites, 30 outdoor parking spots. This one, it looks like, again, it's just a cap issue. So just rolling through to page 3, 22 bedroom, 10, 3 bedroom, 30 units total, average monthly rent 1,042 and change with a 4.9% capitalization rate. Cranks out our estimated market value of 3.377 million, market value per suite 112,566. Pardon me. Rent comps on page 4, CMHC analysis on page 5, 80% of the CMHC market rents. Cap rate stuff is on 6 and 7. Uniac excerpts on page 8. And then we got the picture here on page 9 from aerial pictometry. And then some exterior photos on page 10 and 11, just going around the property on Google. So haven't taken a look at this one. We don't have an effective age. Looking at it on a market value per suite, 112 per unit. We're 20% lower than the market rents. And we got an expense ratio of 55%. So I think, especially on a market value per suite basis, our value is very much supported. So that's my presentation.
Thank you. Mr. Story, any questions?
So just, I guess, beyond what we've asked already, for this specific property, Mr. Brokus, can you confirm this is a model generated assessment?
Yes, it is.
Okay, and again, has anyone visited this property from your department?
Probably at some time, but I don't have any record of that in my evidence.
Right. And okay, that model generated cap rate of 4.9, that's very close to your 20th percentile. So would that not be in contradiction to the order indicating that these properties ought to be applied on a higher cap rate? I ask because at a 4.9, that would be an indication that this would be a very low risk investment as opposed to a higher risk investment, would it not?
Well, I wouldn't say so. We're looking at the assessment on a market value per suite basis. I think if they sold as condos, I don't know where you can get a condo townhouse in St. Vital for like around 100 grand.
Right. So
when you look at that basis, like just trying to test the reasonability of the overall valuation, we're 20% below on the rents. In terms of the cap, to be more direct, I look at the cap as what's calculated as it's a relationship between the NOI and the sale price. And when you look at it on a market value per suite, I feel we're very fair.
Okay, so and just to follow up to that, I mentioned that I'm a little cautious about using the market value per suite for social, because in the first couple we looked at, there were big permits and that's correct, but if this one doesn't have permits and the first property we looked at had investment of something like $80,000+ per door, does that factor into your test of reasonability that you just mentioned?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I think those first ones, based on the pictures, and the permanent investments are probably low.
Okay. Okay, I'm not following that, but that's fine. I think I'll leave it there, Madam Chair. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Stephenson. Any questions?
No questions, thank you.
Ms. Schultz, any questions?
No questions, thank you.
And I have no questions. So Mr. Story, please proceed with your presentation.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Okay, so once again, we have a multi-building complex, two-story wood frame. These ones don't have basements. So my notes, it says they don't have basements. Just want to make sure that that's correct. Yeah, okay. So we visited this property again, this was in September. I visited to review the exteriors and get a sense of the location and any external factors. And our agent visited I believe this is again in May of 23. Sorry, yes, indeed, May of 23. So you can see the photos for interior condition. Once again, not to belabor the point, but we have a interior condition that would not be equivalent, let's say, to market rentals, and certainly not to condos or whatever. So we have, as is the story of the day so far, utility grade properties built by policy, built to house low income folks in the community, and they're not meant to compete in the open market. So these are properties that were constructed by policy as opposed to market factors, so we have to consider that. Ultimately, for this property, again, I think the rents that are used in the assessment are optimistic, and that's fine. I think that the expenses are somewhat optimistic as well. But ultimately, we are accepting the NOI. We're aligned with the NOI. That cap rate of 4.9 for this type of property is extraordinarily low from our perspective. So we have once again, we've applied a cap rate of 6.25%. That leads us to an indicated market value of $2,647,480. Again, that's $2,647,480, which we then round to $2,647,047. I'll ask that my comments carry forward, Madam Chair, because they're going to be the same basically for everything except for Disneylands today. They're all we're sort of telling the same story generally. You can see the interior quality of the photos. I will not go through each one with you. I'll leave that for your review. But ultimately, we feel very comfortable that the social housing complex ought to be provided an adjustment to the cap rate, no less than 6.25. And once again, we respectfully submit the value ought not to exceed $2,647,047. And with that, I'm happy to take your questions, and I thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Schultz, any questions? Oh, no, sorry, Mr. Barakis, any questions? Jumped ahead there.
Yeah. Just one on page 34, it looks like there was like a kitchen that was redone, and then when I back the train up to page 27, it looks like there was like the more original. I guess my question would be, do you know what percentage of the units have been refreshed?
Yeah, that's a great question. So it's one that we ask often, but what we end up finding is in Manitoba housing, there tends to be a reasonably high degree of turnover. So the units are generally refreshed to a standard upon new tenancy, and they can be in very poor condition when the tenant exits. So I can't give you a percentage of at the reference date or on the day-to-day what percentage are refreshed, but they typically are refreshed on turnover. But the major difference, I suppose, we don't have, in a market apartment, you'll have damage deposits, so there'll be generally less wear and tear on the units. these ones are typically pretty beat up by the time the tenancy is ended. So it's a good question for a market apartment, but it just speaks to the unique nature of social housing. I'm not sure, but they're typically refreshed on turnover, and then they undergo generally high degrees of wear and tear during the life of the tenancy.
Okay, thank you. Those are my questions.
Thank you. Now, Ms. Schultz, do you have any questions?
I do not, thank you.
Okay, Mr. Stephenson?
No questions, thank you.
And I do not either. So any need for a summation, Mr. Baracus?
No, thank you.
Mr. Story?
Yeah, just once again, we continue to believe that social housing is different from market housing. It should be treated as such. We provided a great deal of evidence in support. So once again, we feel very comfortable with the 6.25 cap on this property, and I thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, we'll move on to item 5 on the agenda, which is 91 Eric Street. So Mr. Baracus, please proceed when you're ready.
Okay, thank you very much. File number 24-3272. Roll number 08004189 Eric. Another Manitoba housing, commercial row house, 1973, 17 suites, 17 outdoor parking spots. This one, its expense and cap would be the dispute, so I'll tailor my presentation as such. Page 3 shows they're all 2-bedroom units, $955.06 on the average monthly rent. Running it through a modeled valuation with a 485 cap, 1,720,000 or only just over 100,000 for on a per unit basis. Rent comparables again, same ones on page 4. Did the same CMHC market rent analysis. We're 77% of the model rents. So the model rents are 77% of the CMHC tabled market rents for 2-bedroom units. So we're quite low. This one is knocked down below average in our system, which is reflected in the rents, and also the expense ratio running at about 55. Same old cap rate evidence on 6 and 7. Page 8 is the Muniac excerpts, and then some pics. Round my brief out. 9 and 10 show the pics again, just off Google. The exterior looks okay from what I've seen. I haven't visited the property. Looks like the roof looks to be in good shape on page 10. I mean, the exterior is nothing, in my opinion, cosmetically appealing, but it doesn't look like it's fallen down either. So, and then the last one here, last page, page 11. 16, they spent $352,000 on their declared construction value. Interior and exterior alterations to an apartment block, fire dampers, and patch and drywall, which is just repair. I wouldn't consider that's any sort of improvement. They removed exhaust fans, range hoods, and attic fans. They installed a new central ducted HRV system. They constructed a concrete pad in the corner of the building to support the new HRV unit, screw piles for the concrete pad. So it sounds like that it's a little bit of, there's some mechanical HRV and some exterior work as well. So we're only $955 per unit for 2 bedrooms, and Saint Vital, just over 100,000 market value per suite. So I think that I don't think we're overshooting the mark here. So I'll just leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Story, any questions?
Yeah, just a couple. I'm sorry, Mr. Brooks, you said you did review the exterior. Did you visit, or was that just simply from your desktop?
Just from a Google map.
Google Map, okay. Okay, and this assessment is entirely model derived as well, correct?
It is, yes.
Okay. I think I'll leave my questions there, Madam Chair, and just ask that my questions from the previous social housing assets carry forward, please.
Thank you. Mr. Stephenson, any questions?
No questions, thank you.
Ms. Schultz, any questions?
No questions, thank you.
And I do not either. So, Mr. Story, please proceed with your presentation.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So we are here on 91 Eric Street, again, commercial row house. This one is somewhat unique in that I don't disagree with Mr. Bro, because I visited the exterior, or visited the property, I saw the exterior. It does have what I'm going to call a bit of an institutional look from a cosmetic perspective. That is certainly the case. And I note that it is a row house, but it does also have an interior corridor, which is unique to this property. I have some file photos from a previous assessment. Those are not new photos, but they will give you a general sense of condition, I believe. I agree there's been some work, but again, just to be fair, for a building from 1973, work done in 2016, so 8 years ago, that equates to approximately 20,000 per door. That's low, frankly, in terms of what we'd expect to see from private market investment in terms of keeping up these buildings. So just want to contextualize that for the board. So this is south of Belleville. This is in the Worthington area. Again, I visited, I saw the exterior. We have some older file photos to give you a general sense of condition. Again, I initially submitted at 6.25%, but I'm going to make an adjustment. So if you follow me please to page 19. We have good data regarding the expenses, but you'll notice that we cap the expenses at 60%, which equates to 112,600. The actual expenses in this property were running 127,877, which was high. It was higher than what I would be frankly comfortable with presenting to the board. And a big part of that is that our utilities are running at 32.3% of EGI. That's too high. So we do stabilize that, and it's an optimistic stabilization in the hopes that if somebody were to purchase this property, they may find some efficiencies in getting those expenses to 60%. But 55.6% is too low. The city's 104,408 is too low. The actual 127,877 is too high from my perspective. So I've applied 112,600, which is a standard cap at 60%. We'll sometimes go to 65% if the building is much older, and if it has incurable deficiencies, which would affect its efficiency. But in this case, I feel very comfortable at a 60% expense ratio. In this case, the rents are a touch lower. We're not running at 90% of CMHC. I believe we're at 77%. So those rents are where they ought to be from my perspective. So I will adjust my cap rate from 6.25 to 6%. And I want to make sure that we're not coming to a value that's either too high or too low, or over applying adjustments or whatever. So I think it's fair to apply a 60% expense ratio. And given the fact that we are using expenses that are more reasonable from a market perspective, and rents that are more reasonable than some of the other properties that we've seen today, it does speak to the fact that it is appropriate then to adjust the cap rate if we're capturing, so as to not double count what we'll call deficiencies or pain points with regard to risk. So ultimately, when I adjust that cap rate from 6.25% to 6%, my value then adjusts to 1,253,633, which I then round to 1,254,000. So again, we've looked at it on a site-specific basis. We've adjusted those expenses, and I've made a commensurate adjustment to the cap rate as well at 6%. So 4.85 from our perspective is egregiously low, quite frankly, even from a market perspective, but 6% makes sense. So we do respectfully submit that the value at the reference date not exceed 1,254,000. Again, that's based on an NOI of 75,218 and a cap rate of 6% adjusted for the hearing today. And I thank you.
Okay, thank you. Just confirming, although you did say it a couple times, unit
Yep.
value at 6% cap rate and NOI of 75218 is 1,254,000.
Precisely, yes.
Thank you. Okay, thank you. Mr. Barakis, any questions?
Yeah, I did have one, just to clarify on page 19.
Yep.
I just literally noticed it. I was gonna ask you a question about the utilities. They're in yellow at 32%. That's typically higher than what we'd normally see, right? Is that why you made a cap on the expenses?
Yes.
Okay, that's my only question. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Stephenson, any questions?
No questions, thank you.
Ms. Schultz, any questions?
No, thank you.
Thank you. And I have no questions. So Mr. Barakis, any summation here?
No, thank you. Just a quick 5-minute break after this one.
Okay, sure.
Thanks.
I was just going to ask everybody because we have been going for a while here. So, and Mr. Story, any summation here?
No, just very quickly, I think, once again, we've looked at it on a site-specific basis, and I want to be sure that the panel is aware that when we see ameliorations or when we see adjustments on one side, that we're very cautious not to overcount or double count, and I think we've exemplified that here. So once again, we do continue to believe that an adjustment for cap rates in social housing is appropriate, and I think I'll leave it there and ask that my previous comments carry forward, and I thank you.
Thank you. Okay, thank you. We will take a 5-minute break, so we'll come back at about 11:35. Everybody, thank you. We'll go into recess. Thank you very much. I'll call the meeting back to order, and we will resume with item number 6 on our agenda this morning, which is 159A Thomas Berry Street. And Mr. Barakis, please proceed when you're ready.
Okay, thank you. File number 24-3022, roll number 06070087100159A Thomas Berry Street. Assessed value 718,000. It's row house, Manitoba Housing again. 76, 8 suites, 8 outdoor parking spots. 2 stories, 1 building. No sales. This one, it's a cap rate issue as well. Page 3. That's an even split between 1 and 2 bedroom units. Our average monthly rent's really low. It's $782.88. So we have this one pegged down in our model 55% expense ratio. 4.5 cap. And it only cranks out a market value per suite of $89,750. So quite low. It's north of Goulet between Kenny and Taché. So in my mind, a desirable area. At least I do like St. Boniface quite a bit. I think it's a good area for a rental property owner to find tenants. Rent comparables on page 4. It's a cap issue, so I'm not gonna belabor the point. On page 5, we're only 65% of market rents. I think when you see the permit history coming up, we might be too low on that. Cap rate stuff again on 6 and 7 and 8 is the Muniac excerpts. You got some aerial pictures on page 9, and then some Google Street View shots that I took, and then in our system I found some permitted work. Actually says the permits are closed. I'm not sure if this work is. It gives me pause when I see we're only 65% of market rents, and we're coming in at, you know, $700 for 2 bedroom units on a building where the installation of new bulkheads and cosmetic work, exterior alterations, including new exterior finishes, 8 new canopies on the main floor, replace the existing sidewalks, asphalt in the existing parking lot construction, constructing a garbage enclosure, mechanical and electrical work being done. So it looks like they are taking care of this place. It's in a great area. We're super low on the rent. I'd like to take a walk through this one as well. It says closed. I'd like to dig into more whether that is closed by PP and D, because they have their own permitting system as well, where I had to get this information from. So looking at the pics and the fact that we're only 89 a unit, you know, St. Boniface at less than $800 rent, I definitely think we're not overshooting the mark here. That's my presentation.
Thank you. Mr. Story, any questions?
I do. Mr. Barocas, again, have you visited the property?
I have not.
And the assessment is all model generated, is that correct?
Yes, it is.
And okay, so when I'm looking at the permits, have you included the same set of permits 3 times here?
Well,
You just go by the permit numbers, you can see, right?
yeah, it's a, when I looked up, the permits had, there's like sub addresses, and these are the permits that came up for each of them. When I look at the permit numbers, however, it looks like the permit numbers are the same.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I did. It looks like the way I read it and the description that I read, it says 159A/D, 163A/D. I would assume that encompasses everything. So that, I believe, yeah, I did include them 3 times.
Okay. And then, okay, I agree. I think the rent's a little low, but I'll get to that in my presentation, but the cap rate is also, from our perspective, extraordinarily low. So I guess my question here is, when I look at the multifamily table that the city includes in a brief, it's showing that the 20th percentile is 4.75. So and I know you're not in the modeling section or whatever, but any indication as to why this property would come in at a lower cap rate than the 20th percentile?
My hypothesis would be due to its size. It's only 8 units. It's more accessible price point based on what I've seen in the past in terms of smaller buildings and their accessibility to greater purchaser pool, and what that does to the cap rate. I discussed that earlier. I also think that the neighborhood that it's in is pretty darn good for rental in terms of its proximity to downtown, yet it's, you know, residential nature. So
Okay.
I believe that those things are all taken in tandem together.
Okay, but this is Thomas Berry Street, right? So this isn't like Taché or Provence. This is not a main, okay, you haven't visited the property, correct? So this is just your general comment about St. Boniface, is that?
Yeah, I mean, it's north of Goulet, so that's like, I guess, I mean, north of Marion, between Kenny and Taché, so it's right in St. B there.
Okay. Okay, and then I guess, yeah, oh, sorry, you mentioned your hypothesis on the cap rate being extremely low is that I think what you're saying is that there's a supply and demand issue that would be favorable, there'd be more potential purchasers, is that what you're saying?
Well, I didn't say there was a supply and demand issue. I said it's 700,000 per. That's what we have our market value at. I think it's pretty accessible for non-institutional investors to you know.
Right, that's what I mean by supply.
Yeah,
and demand. There'd be more demand for it. So is there now, and we looked at earlier on today, we looked at that $1 million property, and it looked like there were price improvements. So do you have any evidence supporting the hypothesis that a lower value or a lower barrier to entry results in a higher sales price based on more bidders going after the asset? Is there anything in our market that you have to substantiate that?
Well, I mean, when you look at my cap rate table on page 6,
Yeah,
I mean, like a lot of these ones that are smaller on a per suite basis that have lower sale prices are, I mean, they're sub 5, 4, low 4, mid 4. I mean, that's what we see. So that's where I get my contention from looking at stabilized sale information over the past 10 years since I've been working in this section.
okay, and just to be clear though, there's no workups for any of these cap rate inputs that you've submitted into each of these briefs, correct?
Well, yeah, not presented here at the board, but I did them all.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Those are my questions.
Sorry, I'm on mute. Ms. Schultz, any questions?
No, not at this time. Thank you.
Mr. Stephenson?
No questions, thank you.
Thank you, and I have no questions, so Mr. Story, please proceed with your presentation.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Okay, so I think we've covered a number of the issues here. We are at Thomas Berry Street. Again, rent geared to income, social housing building. I visited the property. I've got some exterior photos. That's the northeast corner of Bertrand and Thomas Berry, so that's central St. Boniface. That would be considered Old Saint P, essentially. Okay, so if you follow me, please, to my workup, I think that rent is a touch low, so I've adjusted it upwards. The assessor's using, or the model is kicking out 75,156 based on I don't recall what the figure was, 7 something. I'm using $800 a door as a potential gross rent, so higher than the assessor. I'm using 3.6 as a vacancy rate. That is in line with all the vacancy rates I believe that we've seen today. So ultimately, this is a cap rate issue, but in this instance, Madam Chair, my NOI is slightly higher than the city's. The city used an expense ratio of 40,554. I've used 40,000. Some of the reporting is uneven. It's showing an average of 35. Well, it's not truly an average. It's closer to about 50,000 because we're missing 2021. But ultimately, I feel comfortable at 54.1%, leading me to an NOI of 33,992, and that is just north of the modeled NOI of 32,648. I initially again used a 6% cap. I think after visiting this property, it would likely be more convertible to market. It's not like the others that we've seen today. Exactly, it's like the others in that it has no history of economic profit. It does have a good location. It's, I mean, the street that it's on is not. I would not suggest it's the higher end of the rental world in St. Boniface, but ultimately I feel comfortable adjusting that cap rate once again down to 5.75. So I've used an NOI that is higher than the city. I think that 4.5 is 4.55 is it really, frankly, it doesn't make sense. It doesn't consider some of the issues that we talked about in terms of interest rates on the day. So I'm going to adjust my cap rate for this property specifically on a site-specific basis to 5.75, which leads me to an indicated market value then of 591,165, which I then round to 591. I think that is more appropriate. Again, the cap rate is the major point of contention. I think that my cap rate of 6% for this specific property is a touch high, so I've tried to adjust that to bring it to something more commensurate with a market view. So I do respectfully submit that the value of this asset not exceed 591 based on my comments. And Madam Chair, once again, that's based on an NOI of 33,992 and an adjusted cap rate of 5.75. Again, that final value is 591,000. And many of my comments regarding social housing will carry forward, though this one is, it's only 8 units, and it is a little more, it's not quite the same as the social housing, the family housing projects that we saw earlier today. So I think it's fair to adjust that cap rate to 5.75. And with that, I thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Baracus, any questions?
No questions, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Stephenson, any questions?
No questions, thank you.
Ms. Schultz, any questions?
No questions, thank you.
And I have no questions. So, Mr. Baracus, any need for summary on this one?
No, thanks.
Mr. Story, any summary?
No, thank you, Madam Chair. I think we're good.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so we're going to move on to item number 7 on our docket, which is 588 Demuron. I understand there is a preliminary issue here, but Mr. Baracus, why don't you read this into the roll, and then we'll discuss that issue.
Okay, thank you. File 24-2834, roll number 0609-323-5500, 588 Des Muron Street, and there's an issue. We're seeking the application of non-cooperation. They didn't return the 2022 income and expense mailer to us. So if you follow me down to page 25. What you'll see is we sent out the request for income and expense information April 13th, 2023. It clearly states that in bold, we ask that the information be returned to our office on or before May 2nd, 2024. Failure to respond can result in fines and penalties as outlined in the Municipal Assessment Act. We didn't get information from them. And when I was looking through it, I wanted to make sure that we sent it to the right address, because there was an address change on this property. So it was sent to this 3000 unit 3360 Main so that we sent that April 13th, 2023. And then if you follow me up to page 23, the owner had requested an address change to 45 South Landing Drive in Oak Bluff. On page 24, you can see the response. That's in November of 2023. So this would have been after we asked for the income and expense information. So the mailing address in our system at the time of us sending the request for income and expense information was indeed where they were getting the mail at that point. So when you go to page 29, you can see that the mailing address was indeed changed following that email several months after the request. So like we're on it. That sort of stuff is going now, but you can see the 2023 notice. It got sent to the address on file for it. So I mean, they were getting their mail fine. They appealed that year, so they just didn't return it. So legally, I gotta ask for the non-cooperation application to apply to this property. That's my presentation for that.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Story, any questions regarding that?
Yes, I do. A couple of questions. So just want to go through this very quickly. So we'll start on page 23. And it appears that the Now, just for context, there was a change in property management. So that email on page 23, when was that sent?
That would have, the request, according to our records, came in November of 2023.
Okay, so that's long after the due date, let's say, right?
Yeah, like we requested 2022 in April of 23.
Right.
So that mail would have got there before they changed their mailing address.
Okay, so okay. Okay, and so that's November, so that's page 24, that shows the fellow from the city responding. But I guess my question, and then a couple questions left here. 28, I see an uncertified response. Was there anything attached to this, or was there a rent roll? Was there an income statement?
No, there was nothing. This is just what would have been sent out to them. Like we didn't get a response at all.
Sorry, so but page 28 with those shaded in boxes, right?
I don't know why they're shaded in. We don't have a record of any sort of response
Okay.
to them.
And then I guess I see that it was changed for 2025, but that's June of 24, so that's way later. So
Right.
ultimately, can you prove that and I asked this, Ms. Brokus, because typically when we see the non-co-op request, we'll see a registered letter and we'll see a signature. So do you, and I appreciate, I'm sure it was sent, but do you have any proof of delivery?
Well, I didn't deliver it myself, and they didn't seem to have any problem getting their mail for 2023, or the 2020, to appeal the 2023 notice in June of 2022. At the bottom of that one, you can see the address is still the same. That occurred prior to it. So they didn't have any problem getting mail. So it wasn't a matter of the address being wrong. I mean, like legally, there's nothing in the act that says that we have to send the mail to them. But
Right,
it
but the
looks
act
like they
does
didn't have any
say-
problem getting it to file their appeals. So I'm gonna go with the fact that it probably got there.
Okay, but that's okay, but can we agree that a registered letter would have been sent to them? So just so for the board to be well aware of this, there's an initial request that's made, and that's typically done through regular mail, correct?
Yes.
And then if the city does not receive a response, then a second letter is sent out through registered mail, correct?
I believe so.
Okay, and that registered letter requires a signature, correct?
Signatures do appear on those. Yeah, they are. I mean, they returned it in 2020, so they do know that we send these out. They've had to return them before, so.
Yeah,
mean,
no,
it's
I
not
appreciate
like-
that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm trying to understand why we don't have the, I mean, if you had the registered letter and you had a signature, then, okay, fine, then that's proof, but. I don't see anything in this that shows, the registered letter, so do you have a copy of, the signature showing that somebody signed for that registered letter?
No, there's no legal obligation for us to send a registered letter. Everything that gets sent to my house doesn't require a signature, just shows up in the mailbox. If it would have went somewhere else, usually what happens when I get mail from somewhere else, it shows up in my mailbox. I either go and drive it over there, or I throw it back in the mail and it gets returned and processed, and then a little note is made, hey, wrong address. And then, but that's just how I would treat mail that gets sent the wrong way. We sent it to the right address that was in our system. I don't have any sort of record of a registered mail, which is not something that we're legally bound to do.
I think I'll leave it there, Madam Chair, thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Schultz, any questions?
No questions at this time, thank you.
Mr. Stephenson, any questions?
No questions, thank you.
Mr. Barakis, can you advise, is this not the standard procedure though, whether you're legally bound or not to normally after not receiving a reply to send a registered letter to the owner?
Like they might have, again, like they might have, like like if there was a registered letter, it might, I know there was a period of time when they weren't scanning those in our system to take and put in our briefs. They used to have those all the time. But I don't have, like, it's not, those registered letters aren't scanned into our system. I wish they were, because it would make this
Okay, so
process.
yeah, I understand that you don't
Yeah.
have it, but I'm just, my question was, is this not standard procedure? You know, if for your offices to send out a registered letter if a reply is received within the time frame requested?
I know in the past, that was the standard procedure. I'm not sure if that's a standard procedure anymore.
Okay.
Since
All
COVID,
right.
I'm not sure.
Okay.
I know COVID might have changed it.
right.
So
Okay, thank you.
it's best I can.
Thanks. Mr. Story, do you have anything to present regarding this?
Yeah, just very quickly, Madam Chair, the having dealt with a number of these non-co-op requests, it is indeed standard procedure. You're precisely correct that that we will typically see a scan in the assessor's brief with a signature, and that removes all doubt. That will show that it was indeed delivered. Now, whether the city has changed their process, I don't know, but I can certainly tell you that in this cycle, I've dealt with one very recently where that was exactly the case. You see a registered letter. Typically, there's a scan on the outside of the envelope that shows a tracking number, and then there's a small kind of a window where the recipient will sign. Typically, the mail delivery person will have a small screen, and you sign with a little digital pen, or it will go to the closest post office box. They'll leave a hanging tag on your door, and then you go and sign for it there. But it's our perspective, Madam Chair, that without that information, without proof of delivery, I don't think it's appropriate to apply a penalty that's quite severe. And just for context sake, the email that was written to the department from the Mr. Brooks mentioned the owner. It's not the owner, it's the property manager. So this property went from being managed by the owner to being managed by a professional property management company. And they're the folks who, I suppose, reached out and asked that all of those notices be sent to the Oak Bluff address. So that's the context. This is not this is not a group who've been typically derelict in responding. They've been good. This, I would suggest, is if there's some confusion as to where the response is, it's likely due to the changeover in property management. However, that's just for context. In terms of proving receipt, the assessment department has not done that here. We do not have any indication that somebody signed for this, and so therefore, at least from my perspective, it does not appear that the standard has been met. That the assessor can prove that it was received by the recipient. So we would respectfully ask that the penalty not be applied in this scenario. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Barakis. Any questions regarding that?
I mean, I don't have a picture of me hand delivering it, so I don't have any questions.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Stephenson, any questions of Mr. Story?
No questions, thank you.
Ms. Schultz, any questions?
No questions, thank you.
And I have none. So we'll just take a brief recess while the panel deliberates on this issue, and then we'll be right back. Thank you. Thank you very much. I'll call the meeting back to order. The panel has deliberated and decided not to grant the request for non-cooperation. So Mr. Barakis, please proceed with your presentation.
All right. File 24, or I already read that.
Yes, you did. You read it onto the roll. Yes.
Yeah, it's a commercial row house. It's privately owned, so this one's not Manitoba Housing. It's run on a for-profit basis. It's 3 stories. 2019. It's new. 6 suites. 6 indoor parking spots. It is the intersection of Des Mirons and Cathedral. So number 2 shows that they they submitted 1 year for income expense information. 2017. I think that'll be a land sale. This is new. The property as it is now didn't exist in 2017. On this one, it's a cap rate issue pretty much. I think we're highly similar in terms of NOI. So again, same comps on page 4, cap rate events on 5 and 6. 7 is the Mediac excerpts, and on page 8. It just shows a description of the property, the square footage of it. 1,350. They're all 2 bedrooms. See a picture on page 9, so quite nice. They have garages, there's a balcony. Looks good. And there's some pictures on page 10. And onwards, looks nice on the inside. It's got a garage. It's in a desirable neighborhood. It's brand new. Here's the mailer they did submit to us. $80,000 of net operating income. We're at 65. Yeah, I don't think we're too high. Here's the permit for the construction. That's $1 million back in 2018 here. And then some sub permits for the units. I think that first permit is inclusive of what the cost of it was. Around $1 million. Then you look at the price of the land at $335,000. They paid for it. We're at $1,425,000. I don't think we're overstepping our bounds here. We got the cap 4.6, which I think is right on the money at $237,500 market value per suite. When I look at the pictures, individually, what are they worth? Then I had my non-co-op evidence and whatnot. So I'll conclude my presentation there. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Story. Any questions?
I have a few. Madam Chair, apologies, I didn't mention this, but just a quick preliminary, I suppose, or an issue, I guess, of my own. Just going to ask that page 31 and 32 of the assessor's brief not be considered. This is a previous board order. It's my understanding that we are not to include previous board orders, so I just wanted to, the assessor didn't mention it, but I want to bring it to light since it is in front of the board that it asks that it not be considered. That's
Okay.
fine.
Thank you. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay. No, this is ultimately a cap rate issue. So, no, I think I'll leave my comments from my presentation. No questions on this one.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Schultz, any questions for Mr. Baracus?
No questions.
Mr. Stephenson?
No questions, thank you.
Thank you. And I think I have no questions. Thank you. So, Mr. Story, please proceed.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair. So 588 is Miron. So this is an interesting property. We would consider this an infill property. So it has sort of peculiar siting. I've not visited the interior, let's say, but I've certainly seen the exterior. I've included some photos on page 2 and 3, and you can see I'm mentioning the siting, and it's because it's got a Des Mirons address, but it's actually fronting Bourgeois Street, and it faces a large parking lot. That parking lot is for Centre de la Vendredi. So that's just for getting a sense of where this is. It is indeed something of an infill build. It is a row house. It is private market. You can see by the photos that it is in stark contrast to the to the other properties that we've seen today. So good condition, good location, no issues there. Each unit has a garage, so there's garage parking per each unit. So we would typically consider those rents to be higher than those types of apartments that do not have that individual parking or garage parking, covered parking, but we would also expect the expenses to be higher. So ultimately, what I've done is I've looked to our study to determine how we ought to treat this property. So if you follow me, please to page 18. I've used a higher rent, substantially higher than the city actually. I'm using 1,694, so just a touch under 1,700 per door. I've used a vacancy rate of 3%. Now, something that we do tend to see, and it's you know, the assessor's at 2.6, and I understand that's a straight vacancy indicator from CMHC. We do also have to consider collection loss, but we should also consider what I'll call proportionate vacancy. So when you have, just for this, you know, mathematically, when you have 6 units, if you have 1 unit that's vacant, your market vacancy is certainly much higher than 2.6%. So I do like to point that out when we have properties where there are less than, call it 12 units or so. That becomes something of an issue that we consider. In this case, it's a desirable building. It looks to be in good condition. The finishes are quite nice. The siding is a bit peculiar as it is infill. And we do consider that you know, this would probably rent at a higher rate than what the market is, or what the model is suggesting. So this is really a capitalization rate issue. I've used a expense ratio of 43%. That's a number that we would typically use for newer builds when we have higher expenses projected. So if we have large arcades, if we have elevators, or in this case where we have row houses with individual garage parking. So it's a unique building in that regard. So ultimately, I've used a cap rate of 5.25%. I think that makes sense. Again, that leads us to 1,284,834. We round that, of course, to 1,285,000. I mentioned earlier, I think in the first property, that these cap rates in and around that 4.5% don't make sense when we look at the interest rates on the day. Having an apartment building like this with a cap rate of 4.6, that does not seem viable when we consider that the interest rate was 4.5% and rising. So we've applied 5.25%. In some cases, if this were call it a vertical apartment, as I've been saying today, and all else held equal, we would likely use a cap rate of 5%. But for row housing, we do believe that there ought to be a slightly higher cap rate. So 5.25 is well in line with what we would suggest. And again, that leads us to an indicated market value of 1,285,000. We don't consider the permits or the permit value for anything other than illustrative purposes, because as the old saying goes, you can't simply buy value. So it's not a matter of doing a cost approach, but we're looking at this on income, so we have to consider market factors. So with all that being said, we believe that a value of 1,285,000 is in line and makes sense based on our submission here today. The balance of the material is some marketing material. I believe that's mostly the same type of information that the city has included. He's got some interior photos, which are good as well. So ultimately, we are slightly higher than the assessor on the NOI. 4.6 cap is too low. We're applying 5.25. And once again, Madam Chair, we're suggesting an indicated market value of 1,285,000. And with that, I'm happy to take your questions.
Thank you. Mr. Barakis, any questions?
No, thanks.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Stephenson, any questions?
No questions, thank you.
Ms. Schultz, any questions?
No questions at this time, thank you.
And I have no questions. So Mr. Barakis, any summation here?
I mean, I think 237 a unit Would they sell for that as a condo, or they sell for more with a parking garage in St. Boniface? I think we're pretty fair on a per unit basis. And we're looking at the overall valuation, not just picking at different aspects of the valuation. So I think we're solid.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Story?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. No, we're, just to be very clear, we're looking at an income approach to an apartment building, not a condo or whatever. And if we were to stratify title, that would come with extra costs, and that's not, we wouldn't consider that an apples to apples comparison. So we feel very comfortable, 1,285,000 based on our submission today, and I thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, we'll move on to the final item on our agenda this morning, which is 779 St. Joseph Street. So Mr. Baracus, when you're ready, please.
All right, one moment on this one. All right, file 24-3009, roll number 06060151000779 St. Joseph. We're back to the Manitoba Housing row house complex. The assessed value was 1,745,000 to 1986. 15 suites, 15 outdoor parking spots. If everyone could follow me to page 3, please. I'm actually going to make a recommendation on this property.
Okay,
I'm going to bump the cap rate on it.
okay,
And I'm bumping it to 4.85 using the model net operating income.
okay,
And that generates a valuation of 1,619,000 rounded.
okay. So you say you're the same NOI and you've upped the cap to 4.85% for 1,619,000.
Yeah, I bumped
Okay.
it. I just think that based on the number of units and for the interest of being consistent, I think the property at 779 Joseph and the property previously discussed at Eric, which had 17 units, this one has 15. That one was a 485 cap. I don't think this one here, 779 St. Joseph, should have a lower cap than 588 Desmirons. So for the
Okay,
being consistent, I'll just
Okay.
stop.
thank you. Mr. Story, do you accept that recommendation?
No, I don't, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So Mr. Baracus, continue, please.
All right. So yeah, 860 and change on the average monthly rent, and then bump the cap to 485 on a per unit basis. So we got 15 equal, I'm just doing a quick calculation here because that's 107,950 a unit for the new recommendation of 1.619. Cap rate evidence, or sorry, the comparables are on page 4. You can see how much lower we are in the rent compared to the market comparables. Again, Meadowwood should be removed from the record here for consideration. We're only 71% of CMHC, so we're super low. Cap rate evidence you've seen already. There's some pics on page 9, and then the exterior is on page 10 onwards. So it looks like, roofs are in good condition. Looks like maybe the soffit and downspouts have been replaced, windows. Rec is based on just consistency on the unit count amongst other properties in this docket. So 107,950 a unit. We're so low on the rent, probably too low. After looking at the applicant's pictures, probably could use a walkthrough on this one too. So no changes. That's my presentation.
Thank you. Mr. Story, any questions?
No questions, Madam Chair. I'll leave my comments to my presentation.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you. Ms. Schultz, any questions?
No questions, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Stephenson, any questions?
No questions, thank you.
And I have none. So Mr. Story, please proceed.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Okay, so this is 779 Rue Saint Joseph in St. Boniface. But we have 9 one-bedroom units, 6 two-bedroom units. I did visit the property in September. We have interior photos. Unfortunately, they're not dated, but they would have been done. They likely would have been done with this group in May. That's my guess. So you have some photos to see the interiors. Ultimately, this is a question of cap rate, as is the case today with these the social housing properties. Now our initial position was, when we looked at it, was 6%. However, as I made that adjustment previously for a similar type of build that I thought was more convertible to market, as opposed to some of the others, which I think are would be seen as having a high degree of functional obsolescence with preclusive costs to adaptive reuse. I think this one is more like something we might see in the market. So on that basis, I have considered the history of no economic profit, and as we should, and I've adjusted the cap rate from our 6% to 5.75. So that's in our page 22. So the expenses are in line, they're fine. So the without a management fee, which would be typical of market, we're reporting an expense rate of 72,437. You can see this is actually illustrative. It's interesting, but when you look at the gross rent that they're actually collecting, and this just speaks to this history of no economic profit, the NOI, if you use their actuals, is like $4,600. So it's you can see that for illustrative purposes that these properties don't achieve economic profit, making them harder to maintain, obviously, and leading to higher cap rates. So once again, we're accepting 78,534, applying a cap rate of 5.75%, leads us to an indicated market value of 1,365,807. That's 1,366,000. Now, I'm not of the opinion that we ought to use or to misconstrue the assessed value per door with market apartments, but that is still $90,000 or so per door for a social housing asset. That's a touch high, but I'm comfortable with the ultimate value of 1,366,000 as submitted on page 22. Again, the balance of the brief includes some interior photos, as well as the documents that we've included in support of our argument that social housing properties ought to be adjusted, the cap rates ought to be adjusted to account for the higher risk profile. So once again, we do respectfully submit the value ought not to exceed 1,366,000. And with that, I'm happy to take your questions, and I thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Baracus, any questions?
No questions, thank you.
Ms. Schultz, any questions?
No questions at this time, thank you.
Mr. Stephenson, any questions?
No questions, thank you.
And I have no questions. Mr. Baracus, any summation here?
Yeah, just a little one. Just so I want to make sure the board knows that, like, the reason why we're not looking at the actual income and expenses is because we're not valuing these as social housing properties. We're valuing them in their physical condition, what they would get on the open market on a for-profit basis. So the fact that they're currently operating as social housing has no bearing on what their income and expenses would be going forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Story.
Yes, just very quickly, we're certainly not using a exceptionally low NOI. We are capturing the elevated risk profile of these properties in the cap rate. Now, in some cases, the model will kick out expense ratios that are either too high or too low from our perspective, and we'll make adjustments. And there's no reason to believe that you ought not to use something that looks like the expense ratio for these properties if they are indeed in line with their equivalents in the market. So budget housing, there's no reason not to use those expenses if they're appropriate. We do use rents that are commensurate with market, and for the most part, we've agreed with the rents from the city. I think we've only adjusted them upward. So once again, the leading board orders and the methodology indicates to us that we ought to capture the increased risk profile of these assets in the cap rate, and that's precisely what we've done. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Having heard all of the items on our agenda this morning, I now declare that this hearing is adjourned. Thank you very much, everyone, for your participation, and see you soon.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Thanks. Thank you.
Yeah.